All right, good evening, calling to order the meeting of the Needham Housing Unit Advisory Group, Thursday, April 18th. My name is Heidi Frail. This is Natasha Espada. We are co-chairs of CONE. Today we're going to be discussing a number of things as noted on our agenda. The very first thing we want to talk about is a change to the composition of our committee. So we want to congratulate Josh Levy on his select board win, but because that would leave 3 select board members on this committee, and that represents a quorum. He has stepped down from his appointment to this committee and has the FinCom has sent us Karen Calton as his replacement. So we welcome Karen and we say goodbye and congratulations to Josh. So in addition, we also note a change in the status of Jean McKnight, who has stepped down from her planning board position, but who has been voted and designated the planning board representative to this committee. So welcome back.
Yeah, welcome back.
But we're pleased to still have Jean. Before we go any further, anything you want to?
No, I think you basically summed it up.
All right.
Just the agenda items, so that we have 4 different types of, right?
Okay, super. So we're gonna delay the presentation of our draft zoning articles for the moment, because we are waiting for our consultant Emily Innes Associates to join us, coming directly from another meeting. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about the approval of minutes of our prior home meetings. So I assume that everyone has had an opportunity to take a look at those minutes.
March 28th.
Yep. Does anybody have any comments or discussion on those minutes?
Let's see. March.
As
usual,
the second one.
I do, of course. Let's see. Oh, we're talking about March.
March 28th.
On March 7th. Are we going to do March 7th?
Yes, we're going to do March 7th. We can start there. That makes a lot of sense.
Okay. I sent a red line to Lee, and only one. I only had one question. The red line otherwise was just to clarify or something like that. So maybe it doesn't need discussion.
I don't think it does.
Yeah, Lee agrees. But on page 3, where at the top of the page, there's a paragraph, the propensity measures potential future changes and does not account for replacing existing units. These are units we think might turn over or replace existing units, such as a parking lot.
Yeah, I can see that's not.
I don't understand what it means to say replace existing units such as a parking lot.
Right, so that's probably in the wrong place. It must be, these are units we think might turn over or replace existing units, or just change hands and be developed.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes when something is just unclear and it isn't necessary for the meeting, really, you can just delete it. You want to delete it? I mean, if it's not clear what the explanation is.
I think or lots that could be developed.
Or these are units we might turn over or replace existing units.
Well, I'll let you suggest the wording, but I think I think the point is that unbuilt, like not residential unit lots might turn over and become residential lots.
Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry.
I assume that that's the wording change.
You want to leave it up to Lee, how to reword that?
Sure.
Yeah,
All right
okay,
with you,
so
Lee?
those,
That's fine. Okay.
that's the 7th.
So assuming that change is clarified, any other comments on these minutes or the others?
March 28th, the March 28th, that was the only, is that the only other one? Yes. really, this was just beautifully done. But I just saw that there was an S that needed to be added to a word.
Okay, but you've noted that with Lee.
Yes, could I just pass that?
Sure.
I did underline, but that was just for me, just ignore it. But there's a yes.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
All right, so assuming those changes, perhaps someone will make a motion.
I'll move to approve with the changes discussed.
Second.
Excellent, all in favor?
Aye.
I'm abstaining, so makes sense. Any opposed? Super. Okay. So the next thing that we're going to discuss then is Katie's item with an update on the fiscal impact analysis.
Great, thank you. I have two pieces under this item. So the first one I'm gonna go through, let me just share. Missing Alex in this one. So after the previous presentations that RKG did for this group on a number of the analyses that we had asked them to do, the propensity for change that gave us the likely build out and the school enrollment numbers. We had also seen a presentation from them to this group, I think twice, and as part of the March 20th community meeting, the results of the fiscal impact analysis that they had done. And the question that we were asking in that fiscal impact analysis was, if you looked at a per unit basis, was the tax revenue that you would generate from that unit, how would it compare to the operating costs that the town and the schools would have to incur to support that unit? So RKG had previously done that analysis, presented that it was positive net fiscal impact. The per unit revenue would exceed the added town and school costs. From the discussion that we had on that fiscal impact, both with this group and then, I'm sorry, Karen, I can't see.
Okay.
And then in consultation with our finance department staff, we consulted with them on the results of all of the RKG analysis. In those discussions, it became clear that really there was a second question that we had not asked RKG to analyze that we really wanted them to take a look at. So we went back and asked if they would add an additional analysis. And the question for this one really is, if you're looking at gross tax revenue, how is the revenue that we are generating in the town from these parcels that are proposed to be rezoned? What is the tax revenue that we're generating today? And what might we anticipate we would generate tomorrow if they were built out under either the base compliance plan or the neighborhood housing plan? The reason why this question is so important is because Needham has a split tax rate. And so a lot of you already know this. I'll give the quick 101, but Massachusetts allows communities to apply a different tax rate to commercial properties relative to residential properties. So you could have a commercial tax rate that's 175% of what the residential tax rate is. Needham does do that split up to that maximum amount. So for this fiscal year, 2024, the residential tax rate is $12.52 per $1,000 of assessed value. The commercial tax rate is $24.57. So because we have this split tax rate, the idea that we are rezoning areas that have a lot of commercial development existing there today, we wanted to make sure if all of those transferred over to residential, even though you're adding assessed value, if you're creating kind of a new development and probably at a higher density, there still is that question of what's the revenue implications because of the tax rate. So that's kind of the question that we went back to RKG with. And the context of why we wanted to know the impacts of the split tax rate. So I am presenting their work. Hopefully I will do it justice. I'm sorry that this is so small.
Can you make it larger?
Yeah. There, okay. So just to talk a little bit about the methodology, the town assessors department provided the existing property taxes for each of the parcels that are in the zoned areas for FY 2024. So we have the current tax revenue figures by parcel. And then RKG had already run, when they did the propensity for change model, what the assessed value would be anticipated to be if it was built out under the zoning scenarios. Again, both for the base compliance plan and the neighborhood housing plan. So we had those two sets of data and could compare across what the dollar amounts would be. Two notes. We assumed to build out entirely residential. So even though in reality, some developments may be mixed use, this assumes that everything just gets built 100% residential. It's a more conservative assumption. So just keep that in mind. And we also assumed that buildings built out under the proposed zoning would build out to the max that it could, kind of dimensionally under the zoning. So RKG ran this analysis for 4 scenarios. The screen while I'm presenting. The base compliance plan, the propensity model is the likely build out, and then the base compliance plan full build, and then the next slide will show the results for the neighborhood housing plan, likely and full build. So what you're looking at on the slide is existing conditions. There are 43 commercial properties and 14 residential properties in the base map that are likely to be redeveloped. These are the parcels identified in the propensity for change model. So if you're looking at this and confused, kind of why are we talking about 57 parcels here and 110? It's because the likely build out assumed only the 57 would get redeveloped. So from existing conditions today, RKG assumed that all 43 of the existing commercial properties would develop to residential under the base zoning, and 14 existing residential properties would also redevelop under the base zoning parameters. The total assessed value today is just over 40 million. That generates 884,000 in property taxes. Under the base compliance, the assessed value does rise to 58.7 million, but the taxes actually decreased to 735,000, a loss of 150,000, again, because of the impact of the split tax rate. So really what this tells us is we need to kind of build enough added value to have a net positive in terms of gross tax revenue generated. I do want to put into context, our property tax revenue for this fiscal year is 184 million. And so 150,000 is less than 0.1%. So you can perceive it as a loss, just in the context or the scope of what we're talking about, as a wash or a loss.
Is that anywhere in this document? Because I think that's really important to look at it holistically as a percentage of the total. Otherwise, it looks like for me, for the base compliance, as a loss seems
That's an
a
FTE.
negative thing, right? Like,
yes, we can add that in because it's not kind of in context. I'd say also if there was a true loss, it wouldn't be a cut to the kind of operating budget. It would actually be just a shift in who's paying those taxes to the residential side, which is a bit confusing because of how we tax. But Michael Diener will tell us all about that as a new assessor. Any questions about that, just methodology wise? And then I'll go through kind of where the other scenarios landed.
I just have one question. I mean, no, this all makes sense.
Okay.
It's a lot of information, but it makes sense. One question is, if we had more mixed use where there would be some commercial in here, could it actually even out? And how much commercial would you incentivize?
Yeah. So if there was any mixed use, then the tax revenue generated by the town would be higher than what we're presenting here.
Right, so it's just saying, I guess what I'm asking is it 10 units? I mean, 10 commercial properties, or what, no, 5?
Less.
Okay.
1.
Yeah, I could do the
Really?
math on kind of, do we need one more parcel to flip, or is it 2 more? Like, what's the breaking point? I will say also, these are projections, these are not predictions.
Right, but
So
0 and
it's just to
57
give
is
you a
unrealistic
sense of,
also.
Yeah,
So again, we've gone with the most conservative.
Yeah.
Approach.
yeah. So at some point, there is a kind of a tipping point where you're always
Right,
gonna
and
be
that's, I
net
guess that's what
positive.
I'm saying, if you only have one mixed use project, then you would be, you'd be positive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty darn close. But, yeah. So at the full build scenario, assuming all 110 parcels in the base plan get redeveloped, the tax revenue would actually grow by 1.4 million. Then no surprise when we transition down to the neighborhood housing plan, both under the propensity, which is the likely build out, and the full build, the gross tax revenue is a net positive. So neighborhood housing plan likely build an additional $1.9 million in tax revenue, and under the full build, 6.5 million. So again, not predictions, but projections, and just give us a general sense of what we can anticipate in terms of gross tax revenue to the town.
Because the first plan though, that has, it's 3 stories. Is
3
it-
stories, yes.
It's limited to only 3 stories. And I think a lot of us thought that 3 stories is not, I mean, if 3 stories was likely to work, then the current, what is it, 4.5 stories under special permit that's allowed now?
In Chestnut Street, in portions of the Needham, of the center, yes, it's 4 stories in an FAR2.
Okay, so it seems like if you can't get someone interested in 4 stories with special permit, that getting them interested in 3 stories seems like a harder lift. I just have a little bit of data I'd like to add, if I could just take a minute. So if you go through the entire Chestnut West area, from Great Plain all the way down to Hardin Grandmont, basically the tax average across the entire thing is about $80,000 per acre. And that's mostly at commercial rates. So if you take the entire tax added up, divide by the entire acreage. And just to give some comparisons, the new 1180 Great Plain Ave, the one next to the Congregational Church, the tax on that is going to be $123,000 per acre. Charles River Landing is $151,000, and I think that partly is less because it's got the bike path running down next to it, and it's down by the river. Kendrick is $246,000. Now, if you go into the Chestnut area itself, there is a larger residential building. It's 141 Chestnut. It's 28 senior units. And even though the amount per unit is actually not very high, it's only about a little over $2,000 per unit. The tax per acre on that is about $130,000. So it's hard for me to conceive that a slightly larger project with less parking would be anywhere close to what would be substantially more than the 80,000 in that particular case. One other example, 50 Dedham Ave, which is the mixed one with 10 units of housing, $262,000 per acre is what, now it's only about a quarter acre. And so, the 60,000 times 4 comes out to, a little over that, comes out to over $260,000. So so under these, the amount of revenue that's coming in on some of these other actual housing projects that we have. The other thing is, as I recall, Eric's estimate for per unit tax was something like $3,100 per unit. What we're actually seeing, 1180 Great Plain is $6,230. Modera 700 Greendale is $3,778. Charles River Landing $3,434. Kendrick $3,236. So now these are much bigger projects. The ones that are a little bit lower are some of the older developments. Hamilton Highland, Nahoyden Glen, they're both a little lower. And the one that's substantially lower is Palmer. The Stephen Palmer is much less. Avery, which is also senior housing, but it's a condo format, that's actually $7,400 per unit. So again, some of these are a little bit more, some of the bigger ones are a little bit more, some of these are substantially more than what the per unit estimate was that was being applied to this. So I just did want to add this because I had been looking at a lot of these commercial in anticipation of my new role. And so I've spent many hours going through hundreds of property cards just to understand kind of the basics of how these things look. And so it wasn't actually toward this, but since I had all this time invested, I figure I'd add a little bit more and look at some of these developments. So I do think that a lot of the estimates are very conservative on both a tax per unit basis and on a tax per acre basis, compared to what I think we're likely to see.
Thank you for that, Michael. You are going to be a great assessor.
I'm not sure if that's a compliment.
She's looking for an abatement.
All right, does
And
anyone,
I can share this too.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah,
Afterwards,
thank
I'll
you.
circulate that.
I have a question, if there's such a big discrepancy, should this be a range rather than a number? Because it seems so concrete as a number. I don't know, I'm just throwing it
Yeah.
out there just because if, you know,
Yeah, I think when we had all of the analyses from RKG, I think we all would have, if 10 people chose the assumptions, you each choose 10 different assumptions. And so I think I'm comfortable with the assumptions that RKG made and could stand by, particularly if they leaned on the more conservative side. And so I think I'm comfortable
you
sticking
leave it
with.
as, I mean, it's just a very specific number, like 3632503, you know.
Yeah, but again, I think what I hope we can drive
I'm
home
okay
with
with that.
everyone that we present to is that these are not numbers to like build a budget around. They are to give you kind of a order of magnitude or a general sense of something positive, negative.
Yeah. and I would
Because
just
really
say
it's
that.
gonna depend as developments materialize and what they actually look like and where are they and are they mixed use and
The only reason I bring it up, and that's why I brought up the other way, is because people can be very literal.
yes.
And so knowing that this is conservative, which you mentioned, but also saying that there's a range and that this is the best prediction in a very conservative way, which I think you said anyway. But I don't want that's why I didn't want this number, which is, again, to alarm anyone, because what we're saying is that in general, the difference is positive.
any additional discussion before we move on? Do you want to keep going or do you want?
Why don't I keep going?
Sure.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, and then, so my second item is the memo that was in your packet regarding capital impacts related to the proposed zoning. And for context, for those of you who don't know, there is a citizens petition on the warrant for the May town meeting that seeks an appropriation from town meeting for $150,000 to prepare an analysis of infrastructure, public safety, and environmental impacts associated with the MBTA Communities Act. The petitioner, Mr. Ajamian, has a copy of this draft memo and is confirmed to attend your next meeting. So we will be able to have a discussion about was the money requested in the article intended for something different than what we've produced in terms of all the deliverables between RKG and the staff team in this memo. So just context there. So I do want to walk through, I guess, just the highlights of the memo and see if there are any questions. By way of background, as you know, once RKG had.
That's a good question to jump back to. If Mr. Ajemian's coming to our meeting, can I maybe think about what is the scope and role of home in terms of having a presentation of that sort that may or may not comply with our charter? I don't know that I want to get into a big discussion about that now, but there might be something we think about before his presentation, because I'm not quite sure where that's.
I don't
You
think,
mean
I don't
at
think
town
the
meeting?
intent is for him to make a presentation. I think
Oh.
the intent is for us to figure out where the discrepancies are between the charge in our RFP, what the consultants have done for us, and what he is proposing $150,000 to do. Because if they're the same, then there may be no need. If there's one or two things missing, perhaps we can provide them. So I think we're just trying to
That,
figure out if
that
they're,
helps clarify.
yeah.
Thank you.
What is the role, perhaps, of one of you as co-chair at town meeting to speak for what we're doing? And essentially, if we conclude that there's no need for this additional funding, will a presentation be made at town meeting, and who will make it?
Well, typically, the various boards might weigh in on a citizens petition. We, like the planning board, rather the finance committee and select board, are taking votes on whether or not to recommend adoption or not.
So
All
it
of
would
the
be
articles,
that
including the
board.
citizens petition.
Uh-huh.
And so typically the proponent, Mr. Gemian, would make his presentation, and then members of the finance committee and the select board would speak to their position
Mhm.
on the article. And then, of course, town meeting members or the moderator could ask for any clarification, but I don't know that we would necessarily present anything on home, except to say that we feel that, assuming this is the case, except to feel that say that we feel that we've fulfilled the ask according to our
Well, that's what-
RFP and
that's-
also Mr. Dean's.
That's what I mean. Will we say that for ourselves, or will the select board say it for us?
Yeah,
Katie?
Just added context that the petitioner has been to the select board and the finance committee on this article, so they're processing it like they would all the other citizens petitions. And they know that he'll be here on the 25th. So I think the feedback is not from this group to town meeting, but the feedback is from this group to the select board and the finance committee, so that they understand what the discussion was on the 25th. And they can take that into advisement when they take positions on the article.
Yeah,
Okay.
because remember, we're an advisory group to the select board and to the
Okay.
planning board, so it would be to those bodies.
So that's our role, is to respond to the select board and the finance committee about this article and let them take
I
it
guess
from there.
what about the planning
Okay.
board? The planning board doesn't have a position, doesn't take a position on that?
You could at the
You could,
meeting,
if you
right?
could, if you
But that-
if you
but-
chose to.
But typically, because the select board is the warrant committee, we take
Right.
position on all articles routinely.
Right,
So I
right.
don't know how.
And the finance,
We usually make a decision of whether or not we feel it's appropriate for us to take a position on that article.
correct. Okay.
Great. So this memo was created from taking RKG's analysis on the likely and full build out and the school enrollment, and knowing where the development is likely to occur and at what pace, taking those results back to our town departments. So Lee and I met with the police chief and the fire chief, our other deputy town manager, director of finance, the assistant superintendent of finance and operations for the schools, the whole crew at DPW, DPW director, our town engineer, superintendent of water and sewer, superintendent of highways, missing a few others, but we have a sustainability manager, so that they could take that information and overlay it with what they know and what they do every day, which is understanding what our infrastructure is today, where the needs are, and what they would anticipate the impacts of this zoning to be. So this memo kind of memorializes all of those conversations and analyses that were done by department. I do want to just kind of go through the highlights.
And Kitty, you prepared this memo,
Yes,
not
yeah,
RKG.
correct,
This
yes.
is, yeah, excellent, really.
Thank you, I
Yeah.
appreciate that. So for the schools, in terms of how we did the analysis, the schools does an enrollment projection every year on their own, and that's part of their ongoing functions with the school committee and handling the student population. And what we did is took the results from their student enrollment studies, which is done by McKibben, and added the enrollment projections from the RKG, because McKibben's didn't factor in any zoning, because obviously we weren't at that point in the process. And we compared the additive projected student enrollment relative to the school committee's school master plan. So a lot of work has already been done on the school side to think about where do we need to add capacity in the school system and what are those building projects. And I guess what I'd say the punchline is we did a very kind of conservative analysis and said, if all of the students that are anticipated from this zoning all showed up on day one in elementary school, with the added capacity under the school master plan preferred scenario of the school committee, have enough capacity to support all those students? And the answer is yes. There's one caveat to that the preferred master plan scenario, the big picture context is to put the 6th through 8th grade at the Pollard, to redo the Mitchell. And because we've moved the 6th grade to convert the High Rock to a 6th elementary school. So we're really adding capacity at the elementary level under the school committee's preferred master plan. So the added enrollment from the rezoning for the base compliance likely and full build and the neighborhood housing plan likely build, the students generated in those 3 scenarios all fit under that plan and the capacity that would be done in that plan. If we took the student enrollment numbers from the full build of the neighborhood housing plan, so the max of the max scenario, the school master plan preferred scenario would accommodate all of those students if the Mitchell school was a 4-section school as opposed to a 3-section school. And the school committee has been thinking about both. So that's the one kind of caveat I would want to make. We then did the same analysis and said, if all of the students anticipated to be generated from this rezoning all showed up day one in middle school, would there be enough capacity at the Pollard for them? And the answer is yes. So the overall conclusion is based on the information we have that really anticipated student growth from this can be accommodated with the existing master plan the school committee is working on.
Kitty, can you remind us where the student ratio came from that was used in the analysis to create the number of students?
Yes, it was more than one source. So RKG had data from the Needham Public Schools, but they also had area data as well. So I can get a more specific answer. I don't have that deck.
My recollection is that the actual data that came from Needham was less than the area data that they have, so less than the general model that they use. So they didn't use the Needham data. They actually did use the model data because it was higher and therefore more conservative.
Yeah.
But also, like you mentioned that this assumes every kid would go into the schools, but as I recall, the yield number for the Needham Public Schools is somewhere in the 85-ish% area. Does anyone know off the top what it is? I think it used to be the high 80s. It's now about the mid 80s.
You mean
Yes.
compared to kids who go to private
Yeah,
schools?
the yield is like, if you have 1,000 kids in the school, the yield would say that 850 of them go to the public school and 150 go somewhere else. Now the yield tends to be lower in high school and higher in the other grades, but you're still somewhere in like that 90%, I think, area.
Yeah, and I
In those
don't believe we
cases, so,
factored that
yeah.
in. It assumes all the students
Right.
go to.
I have one quick question. So this is based on the master plan.
Yeah.
So that means that we would have to, and I was on PPBC, so and the master plan has changed because now they're doing the 6 through 8 and all of that. That means that those would have to be built to be able to meet the capacity that we're talking about, which means that at a minimum, it's 5 years for each school, because when you start the process and if it's an MSC. So if something when this zoning goes into play, let's say, the first 5 years or so, will we have capacity in the schools, or will we have to put temporary buildings until these schools get built or we get the funding for it?
We don't have any developments yet, so they would be building at the same time, wouldn't they?
But if it's a 10 or 12, it's a lot faster than if you have to go through state process.
So the master plan is a long time frame. I would say the Needham Public Schools enrollment right now is still very much down from its peak capacity. So from the McKibben projections that the school has done every year, the school's student enrollment is not gonna go back to the peak of what it was pre-COVID until FY 39.
Okay,
That
so you're
peak
planning
number
to
is what we used in this analysis, but we've got kind of all of those years where we're just getting the student population back up to what it had been in 19. So, you know, there's a lot at play, but it's a
Right,
fair
it's not-
question.
Should we
Yeah.
include that in this information that we use peak student enrollment numbers?
Yes, I think it's embedded in
Numbers
there.
Higher than they.
Yes,
It's at the
I think
beginning
it's in
of,
there.
yeah, it's at the beginning of it.
I think it would do us right to emphasize the conservative nature of all of our approaches in every single aspect,
Yeah.
because otherwise, you know, people are gonna have questions.
Well, the only headwinds you run into, I mean, the more dire the numbers, I get it. It's interesting to say, well, if you're saying that you have to rebuild Mitchell now is what, 4 level? Instead of 3?
Yes, if
That would be a
if it was
big, that'd be a
the
big
full
change.
build of neighborhood housing plan, and I think we should be really clear, we're not anticipating the full build of anything, because we don't have full build of our existing
Right.
our existing zoning.
Right.
Right, so
But that would trigger,
we're just
Something
saying
much
what's
bigger.
the max, it's the very, very high end.
I appreciate that,
Kind
yeah.
of, yeah. I do want to also just underscore, because this will come up a lot in DPW, the school master plan has to happen regardless. So the zoning is not prompting the master
Right.
plan, it's not changing the scope of the master plan. The master plan exists and needs to happen under current conditions. It just also happens to be able to accommodate the student growth projected under the zoning.
You
That's
need to
great
say
news.
that because these buildings are the costliest buildings that we have in town. So, you know, to build a brand new elementary school is, you know, $50–70 million. So it's not, so just to say that this is already a projection and it has nothing to do necessarily with this, but we can, based on that projection, we still have the capacity,
Yeah.
would be helpful.
Do you think that it says that?
I'm sure it does. I just want, I'm looking for a loophole, right? I'm looking for
I
things
know,
that
I
people
know.
will get confused about because of.
Okay. Police and fire. This one's easy. The town's made really significant investments in police and fire. We have a new public safety building on Chestnut Street and Fire Station 2 at Highland and Webster. It's right in the zoned areas. So both chiefs don't anticipate any capital impacts. And the fire department has the equipment they need to service these size buildings. So that one is really straightforward. DPW, which is many, many things. Just some framing thoughts before we go through kind of each area of infrastructure. The 3 things that are kind of most important to keep in mind is that DPW, when it comes to development, is always thinking about the system in its entirety. So all of the sewer pipes, you know, the whole system, but they also analyze each development as it comes in, and that work would continue under site plan review under this rezoning. So a lot of the conclusions will have both a systems conclusion and a site-specific development conclusion. And DPW has in process or in the capital improvement plan requesting funding for a number of master plans, for stormwater, a transportation master plan, a water system master plan, and a sewer assessment master plan. All of those, again, are already in the queue. They are something that DPW needs to manage our systems, wholly separate from the zoning. And I think that will factor in as we kind of highlight a lot of the conclusions. So in terms of water, we have 2 water sources, one locally here in town. We have 3 wells out on Charles River Street. And we also can supplement our water through the Massachusetts Water Resource Authority, WRA, which is water from the Quabbin. The punchline of the water section is in terms of the amount of water we have available to the town, we believe we have enough capacity to support these housing developments. We don't even tap into MWRA usually until the summer, and that's almost entirely driven by outdoor watering. So in terms of everyday usage of water, we have a lot of access to water if we need it. In terms of the distribution system, again, DPW has requested funds, 300,000 in FY '26 to do a master plan. That's to really get a sense of the entire system and be able to prioritize projects. Our discussion around how does that relate to this zoning, again, is that the zoning won't drive a project. The analysis of our existing infrastructure and where it is most outdated or where there's been breakage history, that is what drives the priority for maintenance. The zoning would come in if there was going to be, say, a new water or sewer pipe in the street on Chestnut Street. They would maybe pick a larger pipe if there had been more development or planned to be more development in the area. And on a site-specific basis for water, a developer would have to pay to tie into our system. So there's not an added cost on the town there.
Yes, a question about the water. I understand that the water coming from the MWRA system costs a lot more per gallon than the water from our own wells. And so to the extent we can, we want to be able to use our own well water. Do you anticipate that because, as you said, a lot of the summer usage is simply outdoor watering, that won't change very much? In other words, the balance between using, we've got plenty of capacity, of course, because we've got our own wells and we've got MWRA. But would we be able to keep the balance that we have now between using our own wells with the less expensive water as compared with the MWRA water?
I don't know that I feel like I could answer that specific of a question, but I will say, water users pay a different rate if they use a higher volume of water. And so because outdoor watering is such a high volume and we charge a higher rate, we tend to be able to offset the higher cost.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's helpful.
Picking up on the comment you were making, Katie, about chargeback to developer for infrastructure issues. I guess two questions, since we have the luxury of Chris being here. Do we get a nod from Chris that that's within the scope of intended site plan review? That's question A. And then question B is, I think when we look at our draft zoning, which is not yet on our agenda, but we don't have water supply carved out as one of the subcategories in 3.17.9.2. So assuming Chris nods yes, then my thought is maybe we make that tweak when we get to the zone.
Well, I think what I heard Katie say is that tie-in fees would be, we would expect to collect to extract tie-in fees, which would be, the connecting the property to the water line or the sewer line.
But not making the developer pay for the bigger pipe.
No,
is what
we're not making the developer pay for a bigger pipe.
Then perhaps my second comment's redundant. Because of absence of authority or because of the use of the tie-in fee as sufficient mitigation?
Well, both. I mean, I think part of what I take away from the report is that there is adequate capacity both in sewer and water in the system currently to accommodate generally to accommodate. So if there is, a need to put in a bigger pipe in the street, it's unlikely to be exclusively attributable to one particular development. It's rather going to be more likely to be attributable to, demand in that area of town generally. So the bigger pipe in the street, I would not expect to charge the developer for that.
It wouldn't be part of the mitigation?
You would, at a minimum, need to show that the project itself, requires the town to take it from a 6-inch pipe to an 8-inch pipe. I think that is unlikely. And it is, even if you were able to show that, it's going to be indicative of a broader neighborhood-based need for bigger capacity. I don't think we can or should expect to tie that cost to the developer of a specific project as part of site plan.
We might ding them with like an extra traffic light or something or mitigation.
traffic signs, some offsite, some small offsite mitigation, but traffic light, again, that's at a minimum, you would need to be able to demonstrate that the project itself, all by itself, it requires the addition of a new traffic light to the at a given location. That's going to be very difficult to show, and I think that's going to be difficult to extract from a by right development under site plan review.
So if the water pressure at the nearest hydrant does not have the capacity of the water pressure to have a 4-story building, I'm just throwing it out there, the town has to pay to go from a 6 to an 8-inch?
Not for fire.
No, no, what, is that sewer or what?
No, that's
Water
water.
supply.
That's
supply.
water supply.
Because that's unfair to the town, seeing that.
Doesn't it seem though that because all of this is scheduled work, planned for the next 5 years, that the town is gonna create their plan based on the zoning that we're putting in, and who knows who will move in during that time. So this work, actually, it seems to me like it's gonna be mostly done by the time any building starts to happen.
But that's water distribution, not water pressure.
So for water
Just-
pressure, we have fire flow requirements with the fire department, and it would have to, the developers have to ensure adequate fire flow, and that's part of the tie-in process. So it's not digging into the whole street and changing the whole infrastructure, it's what's the connection point to their
This
development.
is part of what the net positive tax revenue does. It's like pays for the infrastructure improvements, it supports the development that we're asking for. No?
Well, but that's the expense of taking away from another
So,
project.
so tell me, can you explain more what you're thinking?
Okay, for example, I did a project that never happened because the water pressure wasn't at the level that it needed to be for the type of building that we were doing. And usually, if you can get the water pressure in, but it doesn't reach the highest level, you have to put a pump inside the building. But this wasn't that, we just didn't have the water pressure in the hydrant. And I find it hard to believe they're gonna go hydrant by hydrant, figuring out water pressures for future development. I don't know, maybe. So I'm just trying to figure out, because what I'm concerned about is that anything that is MBTA communities and Dover Amendment, we have very little site plan review. And that would be a huge cost to be able to do all of the piping to get it, to meet it. And I'm not sure if this water, the water distribution plan is actually getting to that level. I don't know, because I'm not sure. So maybe it is, and maybe, I'm just being cautious.
Any development is gonna have to satisfy building code and fire code, separate and apart from whatever we put in the zone. They're gonna need to satisfy code. So
Right, but
if
if the infrastructure doesn't have the pressure, what do we do?
then if they don't satisfy fire code or building code, they can't build their building.
So is this something that we could go back and talk to DPW and fire about? To check.
To make sure that that's part of this study that they're doing?
So we have discussed this with them, and I just didn't reflect fire flow in the memo, because I didn't think anyone would know what fire flow was. But I will add it, I can add it in. I shouldn't have made that assumption. But I just want to underscore Chris's point, which is if you can't meet code, you're not going to get a building permit.
So then they can't build housing.
But that's,
Correct,
That's
so
what I'm trying to
the town
avoid.
wouldn't bear the cost because the project wouldn't be able to materialize.
Then, right.
Right, my 2 cents is, can we tweak that last sentence of the section on page 5? That says for specific development, property owner will be required to pay for the infrastructure needed to their project site into the existing water system, because I'm not sure that's where we are. And I think if we're going to use a user fee, then we ought to say that, because I think that sentence at least starts me down a path that led to this discussion.
Yeah, I guess I'm confused now too. How do we resolve that? If the town infrastructure won't accommodate the development?
Then the options are that the developer could voluntarily choose to invest in that infrastructure so that the project can happen, or the project would not materialize, Or the town could voluntarily choose to pay for that infrastructure investment with public dollars if it wanted that development.
Okay,
It's
so
just that we wouldn't be in a position, correct me if I'm wrong,
to mandate it.
to have to allow that development to happen when we know we don't have the infrastructure to support it.
I guess that's the question, because if we have very limited site plan review, and that's part of it, and they say, well, you have to, you know, if you created the zoning, it has to meet the criteria. Okay, I just want to,
So either the choice is you upgrade or you don't get
which,
to build.
which in most cases, sometimes it costs more than the building, so then they decide not to do it.
So,
Which is what happened to us, so.
yeah, and does this, if there, I mean, I don't know how these things work, I'm not familiar with fire flow, but if we're talking about a separate network from our regular water system, no? So would you have to replace the pipes all the way to the origination point if your hydrant can the pressure, how does that work?
It all depends, yeah,
To the necessary
to the
spot.
necessary spot where you get the right pressure. It could be like half the town, right? Like, that's why I'm saying that, I just want to make sure that there isn't a loophole here that says, you know, if you're creating the zoning, it means that you're gonna do all of this, the town incurs all of these costs.
Right.
And it may not, but I just,
Well, we have a gravity system, so the water towers, right? It just have to be, that's where your pipes would come out. So it's not like you're going to Charles River pumping station.
no, but it just depends on and it may be that we don't have that issue, but I've seen it happen before. And because of the limited amount, as of right, the limited amount of options that we may have. I just want to bring it up to make sure that we understand what the liability would be.
Yeah, I can add a paragraph to at the
Let's give
end,
Katie a chance to
generally.
address
Yeah,
it, and then we'll reconsider it next meeting.
You know, I just want to comment that there really are three ways that infrastructure projects can be paid for. The cost can be paid for by the taxpayers. You know, you float the bonds, and then the cost of repaying the bonds is added to the budget. The taxpayers bear it. It can be borne by the ratepayers. You know, the water rate is going to increase to generate more money to pay for the project. A system that I've very much been involved with in many towns, but that I haven't seen used in Needham, is to assess betterments when you put in an infrastructure project. You assess the betterments on the properties that will be served by the improvement. And it's an increased tax, and they have to pay it over a certain period of years, and they can appeal it and say, it's because your property is being increased in value because of this pipe. If we didn't put this pipe in, you would be able to develop the property the way you want to. The most recent project I did, I was just looking it up and I'm saying, gosh, was it Kingston or Pembroke? I remember it was Route 44, and they wanted to develop a plaza there, and there wasn't insufficient infrastructure capacity, and the cost was assessed as a betterment on the properties that would benefit from the pipe. That's a possibility. And you know what's interesting, I think right now in Needham is the first time I've seen this done is the new charge, the new stormwater charge. And the new stormwater charge is not only on people who are putting on some new house or some new paving, it's being put in on properties of any size that, you know, over a certain small size that have roofs and paving. In a way, that's a kind of a betterment. It's the first thing I've seen in that direction that the town of Needham has done. But just thinking about, if we're talking here about new development, we're talking about pipes and, you know, sewer pipes, water pipes, stormwater pipes that would serve this newly zoned area. It's also a possibility that a betterment could be assessed because their property is going to be increased in value by this pipe. So,
Hi, Emily, did you have a comment?
No comments from me, sorry.
If I could just put a footnote, I think Jean's 100% right, but I do have, in terms of the approaches, there is the cautionary provisions of the MBTA community guidelines that thou shalt not discriminate against housing that was arising from the MBTA Communities Act. And a community that never had betterment assessments and suddenly has betterment assessments or those projects within and benefited by the community, MBTA Communities Act, may well see themselves talking to the executive office and the attorney general.
Possible.
Sewer.
Look, lawyers love to talk about things like this.
Yeah, the principle, I think, is that you can't discriminate against it. On the other hand, you can hold them to the exact same
That's
requirements.
the counterclaim.
Well, that's the
That's the
question.
counterclaim.
That's the question, like, what can you, right, what is appropriate and what, that's the critical.
Real quick, I'm back to water. Our draw, where we have a license from the state to draw it down, right? Are we near the top of that or
No,
not?
I can get the actual numbers, but in terms of
The Charles River-
MWRA?
Charles River.
Charles River,
we're-
I can get more information on that. So this question though speaks a bit more to drought
Yeah,
and requirements on DEP. And so I just want to say that that has nothing to do with this zoning, but yes, we can definitely answer that question. So if we have an issue around having to not draw down as much water because of drought, that would be whether this zoning exists or not.
right.
Yeah. Okay. Sewer, our sewer system collects our sewage and hands it off to the MWRA and they treat it and we pay them to treat it. So what we manage is the system of pumps and pipes to get it to them. And the two biggest kind of challenges facing our sewer system right now is a main sewer trunk line that runs along 128 from Cheney Street to Great Plain, the 128 interceptor. And the other challenge we have is infiltration and inflow. So this is groundwater or stormwater that gets into our sewer system. So then it's adding to the volume that's going through pipes that are meant just for domestic waste. And then we have to pay to treat it. When normally stormwater, you don't pay to treat it, it just goes into our rivers and streams. Instead, we're having to pay MWRA to treat it as if it's sewage because it is now mixed with it. So those are the two challenges that we have today. And a lot of the financial requests in the capital 5-year plan is around that. We have ARPA funding right now and a request for the Maytown meeting to start tackling the 128 interceptor project. The relationship to this zoning is that there is not a relationship. We have to do that project regardless. This zoning wouldn't change the timeline, the scope, or the budget for that project. In terms of the infiltration and inflow, DPW has a request in FY26 for $1 million to do a master plan around II. That is because we had a master plan that had a series of projects for us to undertake. I think that study was in 2016. We have now done all of the projects in that plan. And so now this is an update of what's the next phase of this. And so that will be happening kind of in parallel to anything that happens under this zoning. So conclusion wise, those are our two system challenges. Again, they are challenges due to existing conditions. They won't change under the zoning. At a site specific level, developments are required to meet DPW regulations around infiltration and inflow. And so developments would have to meet with DPW through the site plan review process and make sure that they're not adding to the II problem. So if anything on a site-specific level, we could potentially see improvements in terms of II.
I have a quick question. So from Pine Street to Charles River on Central where I live, there is no sewer. So are there any, in any of the areas, so everyone has septic, including 1688 is going septic, right? So I just want to make sure, are there any areas like that in any of the areas that we're developing that doesn't have sewer? Because wouldn't that?
No, we have sewer infrastructure
except for
throughout the zoned area.
Yeah. And I'm lucky enough to be in the one. Okay, but I just wanted to bring it up because, again, that's another thing that we wanted to make sure that.
Is that just one, the other one I think of in our town that I think we did include in our base is that area that's already zoned apartment A1, way up toward Dedham. You know where, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, is
Charles
that
Square.
has public sewer too, is that right? That apartment complex there, the condo complex off, Greendale?
I believe it does, and we can double check.
Charles Court.
Charles Court East, yeah,
Across from
or
DMA.
west.
Yeah.
Charles
It's
Court.
across from Dedham Medical Associates. I have
Yeah.
a hard time believing it.
Yeah, it's probably
Yes,
on the town sewer, but
Yeah,
it's
we'll
the only
confirm.
one I could, everything else is right concentrated in the center of town, so.
Yeah.
Certainly would have sewer and water, yeah.
Great. Stormwater? So stormwater, I think, is what we will get the most questions about, given all the recent flooding.
Yeah.
So again, when we think about stormwater, it is both what is our system-wide ability to handle volume of water. It's also how are we addressing the quality of the stormwater that's running off, because we are under federal requirements to reduce pollutants. And then at a site-specific level, we have a stormwater bylaw that has requirements for developments as they come in. So from the systems perspective, just context for today, the DPW has a request for May town meeting for funding for a stormwater master plan that they'll add to some existing ARPA funding that we have. So that plan is probably the soonest that we will see happen. And that is to look at the systemic, like overall, where do we have capacity to handle volume of water and how do we have address the quality of the water as well. What was the other thing I wanted to flag on? Systems wise. No, I guess that's it up the system. So then, the stormwater fee that Jean just mentioned.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So we just implemented this last month. This applies to every property. It's based on how much impervious surface there is. And this will be a new revenue source to support stormwater capital projects that we know we're gonna have to tackle. This is gonna be a big ongoing capital priority for the town.
And the bills have already gone out, is that right?
What?
Have the bills have already gone out?
Yes, I believe.
Yeah, because I serve on the board of my condominium, and I think we got the bill, we were talking about it at our last meeting.
Yeah.
Yep.
So our hope is not just to generate money, but maybe increase the amount of pervious surface we have. So when we think about this rezoning at a development level, that stormwater fee will apply, the stormwater bylaw will apply, which our current stormwater bylaw requires that new construction be able to maintain on site 1 inch of runoff from all impervious surface. But also for properties that I believe have more than 4,000 square feet of impervious surface, those developments are required to ensure that there's no impact of runoff to abutting properties. And so if somebody were to redevelop under these zoning proposals, they'd likely be on the higher size wise and would likely, I think, trigger that part of the bylaw. The select board also has established a stormwater bylaw working group to look at areas to strengthen this bylaw. And so any development that comes in after that, any changes are made to that bylaw by town meeting would apply to those new developments as well.
That's because I've been mystified by the, that this comes up in this context as a negative factor, because I don't understand it, because the stuff that was built, most of the stuff before was built before there was any kind of stormwater bylaw or any kind of requirement to handle anything, right? And the one place that I always see a lot of water, I think you probably do too, at the YMCA, it just fills up in there, and that was built ages ago. It seems like this is only potentially net positive for stormwater handling. Is there any way in which this is like negative in a sense toward stormwater management? Because it seems like it's 100% positive in terms of fees, requirements, and potential assessments on pervious and impervious surfaces.
It's positive, it's positive, but we have two issues that are happening simultaneously. There's the stormwater retention, but then there's the whole flooding and the floodplain because of climate and other issues that are happening. They're being kind of put together at the same time, and that's negative because you're having a lot of flooding that's happening that's not necessarily related it is, and it's not related to the way that the stormwater positive releases that we're gonna be doing impacts it. So I guess my question was in general resiliency. We don't have a resiliency. I see solar in here and I see some other environmental, but we don't ever talk about resiliency in the sense that some of the wetlands are probably getting deeper, you know, and they're extending out. So that was one of the questions that I had about, in most of the projects that we're doing right now, based on the floodplain, we have to build above the floodplain because they don't want buildings, especially housing in these buildings, to actually have lobbies and first floors that are gonna be underwater. So is that something that you guys are working on with the stormwater?
Yeah, and I think the new construction takes care of their property and their waters, they manage it. But sometimes it seems like they're very good at getting off the property and shedding onto the neighbors. So that's what we have to make sure is that they collect it so it doesn't impact neighbors. So, yeah, the engineering is great for managing it, but it has to be engineered also not to, you know, just put it into the neighbors yet.
Well, and the second piece of that is, it's the stormwater lines, for instance, when you're talking about the Y, you're talking about the Y on Chestnut Street.
Yeah.
And the issue there is that the infrastructure in the area needs a massive upgrade. And so it's the addition of more impervious surface, even if it's shed off the property, you have, it goes into a network that itself overspills. And so there's a broader issue that is site specific. And you know, the revenues that the town's gonna start collecting can start to be devoted to that, fixing that conveyance system, but that's gonna take time.
Yeah,
And
Those
we
are good
also,
points.
we also can't drain water to the Charles when the Charles is at flood stage.
For most of those areas, like Chestnut Street and the business area where Sudbury Farms is, that block, that's all, there's not a whole lot of impervious there now. So the net is not, it's not,
You mean there's not a lot of pervious?
not a lot of pervious, yeah.
I know what you mean.
It's all pretty much impervious
I
now.
think we can safely say that we're not gonna be dramatically increasing the amount of impervious surface
Yeah, yeah.
in that area.
Right.
That's all paid,
Yeah.
correct?
yeah. I do want to just add a couple of thoughts, because we hear a lot about stormwater and flooding. There is flooding all around town, including in the areas that we are proposing to rezone. So I just want to acknowledge that that is absolutely true. And to your question of, you know, would building under the zoning potentially make that worse? What I hear often from people with frustration about stormwater flooding, particularly in some of these areas that we're rezoning, is not that building housing compared to what we have today would make it worse, but in their mind, there's a third choice that you could just turn it into open space to contain the water. Now, whether that is possible and how that would happen, but I just want to say that that tends to be kind of a scenario of why someone might want there to not be new buildings.
So I mean, we should take by eminent domain, a bunch of.
I
space
am
and
not.
then- No, I'm just trying to understand what that is. I mean, we would take by eminent domain and plant.
It's more aggressive, it's more aggressively retaining water on site, requiring a developer to put subsurface chambers on site.
Right.
And then it releases out over time, that costs money.
But
developers are
if
happy
the
about it.
development is over 4,000 square foot, then they're required to do that now.
They are, and capacity going to resilience is what plays
But it's
into
not-
the broader
right.
network issue.
The cap right now is not capacity, it's only for quality, the first 1 inch, so you don't care for the inch or capacity.
But I think you have to address the whole resiliency piece, because there's the containing of it, and then if it's 4,000 square feet and you have the chamber and everything, but I think there's a bigger problem in town that's.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that problem, as Kate points out, is spread across town. So none of this is specific to the areas that we're talking about rezoning. They're specific to all over town, and that's why we're trying to strengthen the stormwater bylaw and implementing this.
I just have one thought, because where I live also, we started to have flooding where we never had it before. This has been going on for a few years, but it has to do with construction that was done at Panera Bread. They cut down where it was
an Oldsmobile dealership, Berwick. And they had lots and lots of trees. It was not developed at all. They just had their garage. There was almost a forest back there. There was never any flooding. And then one day, but I guess before they got the idea they were gonna sell the property, they cut down all the trees, they paved everything to make a huge parking lot, and then they sold it, and then came Panera Bread and all that. And that's when all this flooding started. So I see around me everywhere, the first thing that's done when a house or a development is made, you cut all the trees down. Well, trees serve a purpose, and they have roots and they absorb things, they hold the soil. So I think we gotta think of maybe reforesting a little bit, Needham, where thousands of trees have been cut down.
The select board
Yes.
is working
Amen.
on the tree planting.
Right, that's a comment. It's on the to-do list for this one.
An example that was cited at the community meeting was the Hartney Graymont site. And I'm looking at the comment which was made by Nordo Nisi, and it doesn't it particularly focus on stormwater disposal, but it just says that the property, if it were developed as permanent, it would have significant impacts on the junction of Chestnut Street neighborhoods. But as I recall, the comment was, it did have to do with stormwater. And so that's an example. I don't know to what extent that site is already paved, because I know it's used for vehicles, that it's not paved. Yeah, so that's what people are talking about.
And there's a
How,
brook in there,
yeah,
under Chestnut.
how can you develop that in such a way that it doesn't cause impacts on surrounding properties? And I think our rules are that it shouldn't cause impact on surrounding properties if it were to be redeveloped. But we have to explain how exactly it would not. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. So close. Roadways. So the punchline on roadways really is a couple of things. First, we already have plans to redesign Great Plain Ave in Needham Center, and also to redesign Highland Ave from Great Plain to Webster. And so DPW will factor this zoning proposal into those plans if they were to pass town meeting. So they would have a sense of how to, the designs won't be too far along to add it in. The things that we are currently not planning for that may become more of a priority if the zoning were to pass is a redesign of Chestnut Street and generally bike infrastructure, either a rail trail or an on-street network. Those are things that we have done a lot of planning around, but are not in the capital plan right now. And so we've identified those in this memo as things that, again, may be of interest to the town and a higher priority if this zoning were to pass and developments were to materialize. I do want to just call out something that's not in the memo at all, which is we really, we have not done a traffic study on this zoning proposal, and so we can't speak to existing traffic counts and existing conditions at major intersections relative to what future traffic counts would be under this proposal. And so my question for the group is, in my mind, it feels like the one area in this memo that I don't feel is kind of as robust of an analysis as we would like or town meeting would expect. If we are able to identify funds, is there interest from this group for us to undertake a traffic study of the proposed zoning? Any concerns if we move forward in that direction?
To hire a consultant, not us personally.
If you want to take counts on Chestnut, I'll take Highland.
I have nothing to do with all that. I have come all along.
I think that's a fantastic idea, and not only will help inform this decision, but I think a lot of other decisions as we move
Yes.
forward on all these other projects that, yes, are in the capital budget and are on the agenda, but are taking place,
Yeah.
after this happens. So if we can help out the town and help ourselves, it's like a twofer. I think that's a great idea.
Yes, and I talked to our highway superintendent and town engineer, and they would find the information of value for a number of reasons beyond the zoning. So I think it's money well spent if we can figure that piece out.
Do you want to vote?
Yeah.
If you want, I mean, I hear consensus, but if you want to take a vote, I.
You got a motion?
Yeah, let's do the traffic stuff.
Is that legally sufficient?
Yeah, okay. I move.
Really need to get you a Robert's Rules of Order.
I move
Yeah.
do a traffic study, get funding.
Second.
Okay, and I would just add to that motion perhaps that it needs to happen like at an accelerated pace, because we know that traffic in Needham drops off a cliff as the summer approaches. And of course, we would want to have this information for town meeting members to consider prior to the October town meeting at which they will vote. So I would say, assuming that we can make a traffic study happen either in May and June, or in September, October, although that's really cutting it tight for analysis, that this would be a great thing to do.
Seems like the right.
Yeah,
time.
well, right, it's just that it's like TikTok, I mean, it's
Yeah.
like today.
Right, the time of
We'll
actually is
talk
after
with,
July.
And the town would have to pay
engineering
for it.
firms and see what's
Yeah, so, yes, that sounds like a great idea. So, given that there's a motion on the floor, any more discussion?
It seems highly speculative because we don't know. There's potentially a very long time frame and lots of different places where it could be. So it's not like a study of a particular building with a particular footprint or something like that we know what's going on. So it just seems to me anything is going to be, I don't know, it just seems like it would be highly, highly speculative of what it is. It would have to encompass very wide ranges. And I'm just not sure what the.
I think that would get modeling.
How
though.
So we don't have a baseline. That's the problem for a lot of those areas.
We can
Unless
break
the
it into
developer-
sections, just like we've done with their zoning, sort of.
I think what we
Pleasant
would,
Street,
yeah,
and then.
we have RKG's propensity for change, so where's the
Exactly.
likely build
Exactly.
out? So we'll use that data
Mhm.
and the 1 car per unit as the assumption. So I think it's as speculative as all of our analyses, right, in terms of.
Like the school.
Not that I want to undermine our analyses, but I mean, these are not crystal balls. These are making educated.
All right, so,
But we're studying current,
We would
Yeah.
have existing counts, yeah,
but we're not
Correct.
doing. same.
which we don't have
So we can-
post-COVID.
know our current, and then apply the propensity for change to see what the impact would be.
Across those intersections, right? Which is how the center, how Needham Center plan was done too. It was
Yeah.
basically done on a projected out, a plan projected out 10 years, and then it was modeled after that, off that projection.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to ask or request for a traffic study and the funding to do the traffic study. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any against?
No.
Robert, Roger.
Yeah,
She's looking down. She's
Like
looking
Lindsay.
down. So we have consensus. Fantastic.
I do want, not related to traffic, but related to the stormwater. It would be good that even though there is gonna be a study being done, just explaining the different pieces of it would be helpful to differentiate it, because I think everybody's putting, I mean, it's a lot of information and
Yeah.
there's a lot going on right now. But even just when we talk about stormwater in general, differentiating the different issues that we're having.
I have to say, I agree with you. I think that's a huge issue. Stormwater and runoff and capacity.
It's even bigger than traffic right now.
Stormwater cleaning
Yeah.
or management, treatment, stormwater runoff, and the stormwater capacity, 3 different issues that are all called stormwater. I think to the average resident, that's super confusing. So
And
I would love it if we
resiliency.
could find a way to really differentiate those 3 issues, because they're approached, even financially, completely differently by the town. And I think it's just really important that that is understood, so that people can understand what these projects consist of.
And resiliency, because that water has to go somewhere. So right now, I'm just thinking Linden Chambers is next to a wetland and they're 50 feet or whatever it is. So if that continues to rise, they won't be compliant, right? So I'm just, I don't mean to out them, but I mean, it's just that's, the reality is that wherever we have wetlands, they're only gonna be increasing, and so we wanna make sure that we're proactive as a town.
Great. The parking section just highlights the two studies that were the basis for the 1 unit, 1 spot per unit. And the environmental section just speaks to the intersection between complying with MBTA communities and Needham's climate action plan. And also that any buildings built under this would have to comply with the opt-in specialized energy code, which Needham adopted, would also have to comply with stormwater, floodplain, and wetlands regulations.
Can I keep going? Yeah, the parking study was encouraging, but I think we need to stipulate that there is no overnight parking
No.
in Needham. So the parking study found, like, for people shopping, there's the utilization is still, there's still plenty of capacity. Projects will have to provide their own parking, and we made it 1 parking space per unit, right?
Minimum.
Minimum. Okay, there was a lot of confusion, I thought. People at the meeting were saying, you've lowered it to 1, you have to make it more, as if like we were corralling these cars, because they seemed to think it would be more traffic if we had 1 car minimum. And not, I'm saying that would actually reduce the amount of traffic, because you're not encouraging car purchasing per unit, people in these units. So it's actually having a minimum, going on to 1 allows them to have fewer cars. So it's a little bit of a paradox, but I think people got tripped up on it. Now we're at what, 1.5? Yeah, and they think that's sufficient parking, but actually that creates more cars. So parking spaces are basically a pregnancy pills for cars. Okay, that's like the city planner said. So that's having fewer spaces actually reduces the amount of cars.
Well, I do think, I want to compliment Katie, because I do think that her conclusion in the parking section does make that clear, that a developer may choose to build additional parking.
Right.
I think we need to, the parking minimum was misunderstood at that meeting to be a parking maximum. As in, you could only have 1 space maximum. That's not the case. The developer can put 58 spots per unit if they choose and they think they can sell it.
Right, and but that would probably create more traffic downtown,
Well,
but having it
I expect so.
less would make less traffic. But thank you very much.
Yeah.
Katie,
well
you did a
done.
really great job.
Well
We're just
done.
trying to troubleshoot things that could.
No, I
loopholes.
love all the
So, I
feedback.
don't mean to be so negative, yeah.
No, so I'll update this based on your comments for the next meeting, which we're getting close.
Oh, I'm sorry, and environment, you did say about housing, new construction would be more green
Absolutely.
and would be,
But it's not anything that we're mandating in Needham. It's based on the stretch code and the opt-in specialized energy code.
Needham adopted the most stringent energy code.
Right, but that's just energy.
But it
Right.
has nothing to do with the zoning. It is in place today.
and large,
Yeah.
Right.
and large
No,
capacity
no, I
buildings
understand.
are built by passive house standard.
Yeah, if it's more than
German
12,000 square feet.
But that's all energy. I'm talking like other, this is environmental, so environmental is water, it's all that stuff. So are we creating, like, I guess my question in general is is the zoning for MBTA communities, can it relate back to general zoning, or does it all have to be included in here?
I'm not understanding your question.
So, right.
Underlying zone still exists, right? Is that what you mean?
No, okay, so if somebody is gonna build, they're gonna take this zoning, and maybe Chris, this is a question for you. They're gonna take this zoning, and they're gonna say, because right now, we have a stormwater, we have stormwater zoning, but I see here that there's in 3.17.7, I see here that there's stormwater is E. So it gives you zoning for stormwater here, so it doesn't refer you to the general stormwater. So do we have to contain everything in this zoning
But that's a
article?
good transition to our next agenda item.
Hello, Emily. We're excited to have Emily Minnis from Minnis Associates join us to explain and walk us through the draft zoning for the MBTA communities articles. And I'm sure that you heard Natasha's question, and so take it away.
Solid segue, Natasha. Thank you very much. And the picture behind me lies. I'm not actually in Newburyport. I'm home, but I appreciate you taking the other pieces first to get me here. Seventh meeting of the day. And we started the morning in Pittsfield. So yes, for the zoning. So Natasha, that's an excellent question. What I tried to do in the initial draft, and I should say thank you to Lee and thank you to Chris for your extensive comments on there. There's been a little bit of back and forth. But when doing an overlay, I try and do two things. One is capture as much of what's in the zoning already as is appropriate. And the second thing is, where possible, point people to existing portions of the zoning. So for any of you who might have looked at the sample zoning, we certainly, that HLC put out, we certainly started there, but it's been very much tailored to Needham's existing format, Needham's existing requirements. So in that particular section that you were referring to, and I'll put it up in a minute, but the development standards, I first looked to what Needham had and then pulled the appropriate pieces into the zoning. So you could certainly add pieces to it, although I would caution on two things. One is, I think you already brought up the fact that the requirements for this multifamily, which is an as of right use, can't be out of whack with some of the other some of the requirements for other uses in town. So remember, and the second part of that warning is, it is an as of right use. So as you think of the development standards and design guidelines that you put in, they do have to be consistent with an as of right use and not so overly burdensome that they by themselves would create a barrier to that as of right use. So as we were drafting, as Lee and Chris and I were going back and forth, that was very much kind of top of mind for those development standards. And I'm actually going to put this on the screen now because it's going to make it a lot easier for us to discuss the topic if we can see what we're looking at. So hopefully you can all see the beginnings of the memorandum.
Emily, can I ask you just one question on this
Sure.
particular piece of zoning? If our stormwater bylaw committee makes our stormwater bylaw more stringent, but we've pulled in the stormwater bylaw to this article, do we run the risk of having a less stringent set of rules for the developed area or the zoned areas versus the rest of the town? Or does it automatically kind of port into and update everything?
So I think the key there is how you refer to it. And I'll use an example from a community last night where they have floodplain regulations, and their what is a flood hazard district refers specifically to a dated FEMA map, rather than saying the FEMA maps as amended. So I would, if there's something where you're about to change a stormwater bylaw, are you keeping the same stormwater bylaw number and just amending sections of it? Are you replacing that existing number with something brand new, but it's staying the same place? Or are you putting something, a brand new bylaw in that would need to be referred to separately from what's there already? And I think that's going to be the key to referring to something that you think might be likely to change. I tend to try and refer to the highest level of the discussion, unless there's a provision, it's 3.17.2.1 that we need to refer to, because that's very specific to multifamily. I tend to like to refer to the highest one, assuming that once we've done that reference, it's always going to point to that higher level. Chris, I don't know if you have anything that you want to add to that in terms of referencing other parts of the bylaw.
No, I I absolutely agree with that, Emily. Yes, the zoning bylaw can certainly be drafted in such a way to point to the standards contained in the general bylaw. And even in a way that I think would allow for the references to keep working, if the general stormwater bylaw were updated a year, or 2 years, or 5 years from now, it's just sort of a drafting exercise to make sure that the connection is drawn properly.
I would recommend referring to it when we do specifications for projects and they're 300, 800, 1,000-page documents. You want to have something in one location, because if it changes and this doesn't change, then it becomes inequitable, right? So referring to it and having it only change in one location, to me, feels safer. But then also understanding, like, they have a floodplain zoning, and I don't know what we have here for floodplains, right? Because I don't build in Needham. So there are certain things that we really want to think about if we want to add, because of the things that we have now, issues that we have now that we didn't have before. And that's why I kept on bringing up resiliency, because I'm seeing it in every community we work in.
I mean, we don't.
But if you don't put it
designate-
here,
the town doesn't get to designate a floodplain, doesn't it?
It's, is it
It'll be
USGS?
the,
Well, we have a floodplain zone. We have basically followed the federal rules, and we have identified, consistent with FEMA regulations, where the floodplains are in Needham, and they're all mapped. And then there's basically a floodplain set of rules and regulations that are embedded in our zoning that regulate what you can and cannot do within that floodplain.
but we want to make sure that it's amended it's going to change pretty soon again, because of everything, all the levels are rising. So I just want to make sure that we don't get caught with this getting outdated as soon as it's out.
Right.
Yeah, because we're pursuing other things. So
You're saying that in E, you don't want to have.
I don't
speed
want
and
to write E, because I want to say this is based on the stormwater section,
Right.
blah, blah, of the zoning code.
couldn't agree with you more.
And that's.
sorry,
the same
making
thing-
you all dizzy, but I'm just moving to that section. So,
Headlights, like we already have a piece of design that talks about headlights. So now we're rewriting it here.
Well, so I think to one of the points that Emily made, I think it is, when we're limited in terms of the level of review that we can apply to multifamily housing in the MBTA zoning district, both limited in terms of the type of review we can perform, which is not special permit, but does include site plan review. We're additionally limited in terms of the criteria that we can apply, because I think, we run some danger if we try to apply under site plan review criteria that are too open-ended, subjective, and discretionary. So it is, I think we're going to hear from Emily when she starts going through it, is that some of the development standards that are included in this draft are an attempt to pull out of the rest of the zoning bylaw the things that we can apply and that we want to apply to MBTA zoning districts, to reduce somewhat the sort of cross-referencing that you need to do within the bylaw when you're trying to build and review one of these types of projects. So there should be one, I think for when we are limited in terms of what the review we can apply and the criteria we can apply, it does, I think, make some sense to try to consolidate all of the standards into one section of the bylaw that both applicants and the planning board and the building commissioner can go to determine whether the project complies, rather than, having to trace your way through 6, 7, 8 sections of the zoning bylaw.
All right, well, let's let Emily.
I just want to mention that because I looked into this before. The only property that we're talking about rezoning that is in the floodplain district is a small portion of the Petrini property, which is now zone apartment A1, right there.
And the other one too.
Where?
The other one off of Greenville. That's floodplain on the back of it.
The one off Green, the other Charles Gate East. Oh, okay, that one too then.
Let's let Emily get started taking
Okay.
us through what she's done and ask questions as we go along.
So I've moved this back up to the beginning, and this is basically set up to be the series of articles that will be voted on at town meetings. So you can see the structure already starting up there. So the first one is whenever we look at changing zoning, we have to see what other sections of the bylaw need to change to accommodate that zone. So in this case, we are adding a new overlay district. And so you have two places in your zoning, or a place in your zoning where you need to add an overlay district, and that is section 2.1 classes of districts, has all your lists of zoning districts. So we're simply adding it to that. The other thing that we look at is what definitions are required for the new district that we're adding. And in some cases, those new definitions can be added to your global definitions. For you, it's section 1.3. And in some cases, the definitions may be so specific to a particular bylaw that it makes more sense to leave them within the body of the article. So here we're adding applicant to section 1.3 definitions because we do use it as a defined term later on, and it's not already in there. When we get to the multifamily overlay district, you'll see that there are some additional definitions that are really just for this one. There were some cases where the term in your existing 1.3 definitions was slightly different than your term in was proposed for the overlay district. In that case, we've either looked at it and made a judgment call that it's not so different that we need to make a change, or we've added it to the overlay district. So the first key piece is the purposes of the district, why you're doing this. And right now we have obviously referring to the MBTA Communities Act and Section A, supporting vibrant neighborhoods and establishing controls for responsible development. Some of this language was taken fairly closely to what you have already in terms of responsible development and the impacts upon nearby residential and other properties. So when I do this, I look to see what other things has the community got in there. And then we note that this is an overlay district. These are different from the underlying zoning districts, and they can increase the density and dimensional requirements, but it has to comply with the requirements. So it gives the authority for the rest of the section for that overlay. 3.17.2 scope of authority does the same thing in that it goes into a little bit more detail about how the overlay district and the requirements of the underlying district work with each other. So first of all, the overlay district, if it's has an alternative to the requirements of the underlying district, it supersedes the underlying district. In some cases where it's silent, then we note that the requirements of the underlying district apply. And that's so if somebody comes in and says, well, there's a difference here. We know how to understand the way there might be differences. And of course, the reason we have an overlay district is there are differences here, and we want the key pieces of the overlay to apply. So the second part of this section, scope of authority, lists the subdistricts. And there's been a lot of talk using the names of the existing zoning districts. But I thought as people start to apply this overlay district, discuss this, it's going to be very difficult talking about, some of these districts with their full name that are the underlying districts versus the sub-district that's within the overlay. So remember, for these parcels, we now have two, or in some cases where there's an existing overlay district, 3 ways that a property owner can develop under this. They can do, for example, the Chestnut Street business. There's the Avery Street business. There's an Avery Street business overlay. Now there's this multifamily overlay, which has an ASB subdistrict. So naming the subdistricts in a way that we can understand where they're coming from, understand the history of this parcel, what applies is important, but we want to make it a little bit easier for people to refer to the subdistricts and the multifamily overlay. So just keep that in mind. And you'll see these same names when we get to the tables. Definitions what I talked about earlier, is that in some cases, some of these definitions are a little bit different from what you have in other parts of the bylaw, so we want them to be specific. And in other cases, they're new, but we're really only talking about them in this bylaw. I think One thing Lee had called out was open space where we have contiguous undeveloped land within a parcel boundary. She called out the use of the word contiguous. And it's something that I like to apply where a community wants open space that's meaningful. So they can't say, well, we have a strip of land here and a strip of land there and a strip of land over here, and all adds up to the right percent. So we're good, right? We want the open space to be meaningful. So that's why that's there. Other than those, I will let you go through the districts, and we can always jump back when we have questions. Use regulations. So there are right now in this base zoning district, there are two sets of use regulations. One is those uses that are permitted as of right, which is multifamily housing. And that is defined earlier. And then the second that is as of right is accessory uses to any of the permitted uses. So anything that is considered to be accessory to multifamily housing. In this case, it's parking, including either surface or structured parking. When we get to Article 2 and start talking about the neighborhood plan, you'll see that this section changes. The other section that's going to change with the neighborhood plan is the dimensional requirements. So following Needham's current practice of dividing the tables up, which I have to say makes it much easier to get on an 8.5 by 11 page. So thank you very much, Town of Needham. A lot of people, you almost need an 11 by 17 to get all the dimensional requirements in. So we start off with the lot area, frontage, and setback requirements. These are the ones that are going to apply in the overlay district. And you'll see now we're using the sub-district names for each of the dimensional standards. We went over these at the previous meeting, so I'm not going to go over them in detail again. Lee has reviewed them and made sure they were consistent, but of course, as we go through this, if you have any questions, let me know. Footnote A is one of the first times that we bring forward something from the underlying zoning. So as Chris mentioned earlier, I don't like the practice of saying, go back to this section to see this. I like everything as much as possible to be in the single article, or the single section of the bylaw, so people don't have to do a lot of flipping around. I think you get mistakes that way. So this side or rear setback is something that's mentioned in the underlying zoning. We're clarifying that it's not applying in the overlay district because it's residential to residential. We're also noting the requirements for surface parking and underground parking structure. Those are being brought forward from the underlying. And then there was a secondary requirement for I think it was Chestnut Street. Yes, up here, number 10 under ASB, the ASB sub-district for the rear setback along the MBTA right of way. So you'll see just the footnotes only apply to certain portions or certain sub-districts. Building height requirements was really easy. In fact, I wondered about having a table at all, but it becomes important in the neighborhood plan. So I left it because under the base zoning, the building height in both stories and feet is the same for all of them. We do have a few exceptions. A and B come directly from the sample zoning from EOHLC. It allows A allows the exceptions for chimneys, ventilations, towers, etc. B is exceptions for renewable energy installations. There is, and Lee, you may want to talk to this further, but there's some discussions about kind of townwide restrictions on this. And so we've added this line about consistent with the requirements of the underlying district for screening because there's something else going on there. So I want to point back to that, knowing that that's being changed. And then in the ASB sub-district, the applicant can have a special permit for a height of 4 stories and 44 feet.
Emily, can I just ask one question on this?
Sure.
So there's an article going to town meeting that would allow solar installations by right.
Yes.
So this talks about the site plan authority may waive the height and setbacks. So that's part of what would change should that article be passed, correct?
So this covers more than just the solar energy installations, but that might be, I haven't seen that article to know if it has an impact on the site plan review, in this case, the planning board's ability to waive the height and setbacks. Here, we just wanted to make sure that you didn't have to worry about this limitation of 40 feet in order to put solar panels on. You can go up to 40 feet and add the solar panels. I'd have to just double check the wording of that other article, Heidi.
Okay,
So I'll agree with
we'll make sure
that,
that it
yeah.
squares.
That,
Okay.
that was the reason I
because
think we had that one provision in it,
Yeah.
to be
Okay.
consistent. And because of that change that's being made to the solar bylaw. But
Super.
yes, but maybe we can be more specific in terms of how we approach it.
Well, I mean, just as long as we borrow those requirements, we would still want this to be by right and not need waiving of any.
But it should follow the requirements in
Yeah,
that
yeah,
article, so
yeah.
that's the same thing with what's gonna happen with the stormwater eventually, like, we don't want that, we don't want them to be in conflict.
Exactly, okay, so we'll find a way to.
And I'm just putting a highlight on the text, so I know that we have to come back to this section, so.
Thank you.
Building bulk and other requirements. So again, same format that you have in your existing zoning. All of these should be consistent with the conversations that we've already had. And then just actually there's one double set of asterisks that need to come out. But other than that, ASB subdistrict, there was the ability to do a special permit for a floor area ratio of 1.4. So that's added in there. And then we are making it clear that more than one building is allowed on a lot, but they have to comply with the requirements of this section. So because you don't have a global allowing more than one building on a lot. So we added that here. Off-street parking, we've talked a little bit about tonight already. So 1 space per dwelling unit, that is a minimum number, so they can always come forward with more. Parking areas. So this is the first example of where we are pointing them to an applicant here or anybody else reviewing this, pointing them to something that already exists. I reviewed 5.1.3 and did not see anything that I felt would be inconsistent with HLC's guidance on development standards. And then we note that the remaining provisions don't apply. Same thing here. If it's enclosed parking, we can just point you directly to the existing requirements. There was no need to repeat that. I am also averse to repeating too much stuff if you don't have to. Minimum number of bicycle parking spaces, 1 space per dwelling unit, and bicycle storage. This is fairly consistent with the sample zoning, but with a modification to make it very specific on how many spaces had to be integrated. We had pushback from a developer in another community early on that requiring all of them to be covered was an undue burden. So 25% seems to have been something that's a reasonable threshold. Development standards.
Can I ask a
here.
question?
Yeah,
Sorry. Do you have anything related to the floor level that it can be? Can it be down at the lower level with the parking garage, or this doesn't say that? I mean, in Boston, you have to be in the first level. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, we didn't have a requirement for where it had to be done. I did have one community where they talked about it. We actually added in that it had to be in a fireproofed structure because they had been reading about New York's problems with e-bikes and batteries catching on fire. So they were concerned about that. We did not put that in here, but could certainly do that. I think part of the question in that community, they felt that they were more likely to have structured parking than surface parking. So that came into that discussion. They're already going to be a fireproof structured building devoted to parking. So I don't know that is necessarily an issue that you've seen or have been worried about, but this person was sensitive to it. So, we could add this should be on a lower level if you feel that's important. I think that'd be
Not
easy enough.
necessarily. I mean, I think you can give the leeway. It all depends if the footprint is tiny. You don't want it on the first level because it takes up your real estate. So I just wanted to ask in case there was some provision that MBTA required.
They did not have a requirement for the location of the bicycle parking spaces, and you don't have to require that it seemed to be one that many communities were continuing to include. Because it's nice to have at least some covered parking spaces, but it's not something that's mandatory to put in your zoning. So with the development standards, having just said that I prefer to point to existing zoning where possible, in this case, you had standards for multifamily development in a few different places in your zoning bylaw, and it seemed to be a little bit easier to bring them together into a single place. For one thing, you did have a place in your zoning bylaw where multifamily housing had in certain places be subject to special permit requirements. And we're making it very clear with A that multifamily in the overlay district is not subject to any special permit requirements. You'll see there are places in here where we've pulled criteria that might otherwise require a special permit. Building entrances, so I looked at the existing overlay districts that you had and where it was appropriate to bring some of those requirements in, like this one, for example, building entrances to be on Chestnut Street to actually front Chestnut Garden, Highland, Hillside, etc. Because we're trying to keep a consistent development pattern in these places. So most of these are pulled. A couple of these, like plantings, including species that are native and adaptive, and if they're on, they should be on the, if they're on the prohibited plant list, they are prohibited. That is something that was in the sample bylaw, so you'll see a few of those. And here you had some existing things on how stormwater and snowmelt drainage should be included, offsite glare, etc. So, and in general, I was looking for those things existing in your zoning that had specific and measurable criteria as recommended by HLC. APT1, actually I need to change that. That's a typo. It should be A1. So sorry for that. But that had some very specific requirements for development projects in A1. And so we just pointed directly to those. They seemed reasonable. There's the one substitution, but there didn't seem to be a reason to repeat every single one here. It was easy enough because they were discrete references that we could reference them there. And the same thing for the B. And again, we just need to change the text to refer to the new sub-district names. I missed that. But they had a very specific, easily pointable to section. Affordable housing, it's applying to 6 or more dwelling units. We have the 12.5% that came out of your EFA. But one of the kind of challenges that we have is HLC is a little buried with the number of applications coming through. And we haven't seen anything based on what I heard from Eric at RKG Associates. We haven't actually seen an EFA approved yet. So I've put in this section right here. The town of Hopkinton used it, and it was the ability to, if HLC strikes the language above about the 12.5%, that we basically have the required tax or the minimum requirements, the 80 or the maximum requirements, sorry, the 80%, 10% from HLC is automatically added. Now, you've got a little bit of advantage in that this is going to go to HLC for their review before town meeting, so we should actually know this answer. But just to let you know that we've got that in there for now until we get better guidance on the acceptance of the FAs. And then finally, your affordable units. These mostly came out of the sample zoning, but it's to make sure that they are, it's basically the development standards specific to affordable units and making sure that, you know, they are indistinguishable from other units on the property and they have access to shared amenities. Site plan review is under this draft. It's required for all projects within the overlay district, calling out specific submission requirements, the timeline here, and then the approval requirements. So making sure that all the documents have been submitted and the town has what it needs for the review. calling out the fact that application materials will go for other boards and departments and agencies. They have time to review. And there's a public hearing in accordance with those the requirements and the state legislation. And then the site plan review has to be completed within 6 months after the date of submission. And then the site plan review approval is conditioned that they have actually submitted the information, which sometimes can be a challenge, and that it meets the requirements of this section. Finally, in that working with waivers, so the ability to waive a couple of requirements. And then just allowing some dimensional, this is in your zoning already, that if there is a building that is being preserved, that's listed on the National Register, or the other registration sites, or is pending for inclusion, that there's the ability to waive some of the dimensional standards to preserve that building. So addressing the fact that you have historic buildings in this area, that the applicant can phase a project, but the submission has to show full build out and all associated impacts, and that the planning board can, if they wish, adopt and amend design guidelines. And key here is that the design guidelines do have to be objective and not subjective. So a design guideline that says the building has to be attractive is not a good design guideline. So I know you know this, but there are some communities that don't. So that is the end of Article 1. I think it might make sense to go through Article 2 just to show you how it fits into Article 1, and then I'm happy to take questions. Article 2, you have a different set of districts because we now have Chestnut, what we were calling Chestnut East, West, and Garden Street. So those are different districts, and the Industrial Crescent is a different district. So we have to amend the names. You're going to see that we're amending very few things because this amends the article we just looked at. So if Article 2 passes, it amends Article 1. It is not, you cannot pass Article 2 by itself. Article 1 has to have passed. So we're allowing a new permitted uses, so mixed use buildings in the CSB subdistricts, which allow all uses permitted as of right in the underlying district, which would therefore be a Chestnut Street district, and accessory units permitted as of right. There's also a spec permit because some of the accessory uses in the underlying districts are only permitted by special permits. So there, you now have two, if Article 2 passes, you now have two special permit considerations, one for the height and the FAR for the ASB subdistrict, and one for accessory units in the CSB subdistricts. And then you're seeing the exact same tables, except they're a little bit longer because we have more subdistricts. So there's a table 1A and a table 1B. You know, if this were an 11 by 17, you just, or a landscape version, you just see them all side by side. And we've just added in the new subdistricts. Again, we went through the dimensional standards at the last meeting. See the same thing. So all we're doing for 17.5.1, 2, and 3 is merely swapping out the tables. And instead of one table 1, there's a table 1A and a table 1B that has the subdistricts. So I'm just going to skim through that. And then finally, in development standards, you now have mixed use buildings. So we've added 2 development standards specific to a mixed use building to section 3.17.7. And that's it for Article 2, because we're just amending Article 1. There is an Article 3 and an Article 4 that discusses the meets and bounds. I don't have them up on the screen, but we can certainly discuss what that is. But essentially, Article 3 would create the subdistricts for the base zoning, and Article 4 would add / modify the subdistricts for the neighborhood plan if that passes. Again, if Article 1 passes, Article 3 needs to pass. If Article 2 passes, Article 4 needs to pass because they are linked in that way. And that is a basic overview. Happy to go back to any of the sections and discuss or answer questions.
You want to talk about the proposal?
Sure, I'm happy to. I mean, that's beyond the scope of a question. Happy to do it. So at last meeting, I had raised issues with regard to, not raised issues. I had talked about how at our last public meeting, there was quite a call for workforce housing. And I talked about that a little bit at our last meeting. And it seems to me that if we can get ourselves to include workforce housing, that could be helpful. So I've had one or two conversations with Heidi, a conversation with Lee, and the thinking is to, for discussion, that in those locations where under the neighborhood plan, where we're adding or allowing the addition of an additional half floor for mixed-use retail, to present an alternative to the development community, which would be to obtain the additional half floor by either developing with mixed-use retail, as is currently in here, or alternatively, to have the building be 100% residential with workforce housing. So that would be a way to incentivize, use the additional half floor of structure that we're offering to the development community. And saying you can obtain that additional half floor if you have the building be a workforce housing building, not exclusively. But at the moment, if you remember, we have a 12.5%. This is an idea that Lee was very clever to come up with, but I'm not saddling you with it, Lee. I'm presenting it.
What's in our current zone?
Sorry?
12.5% is what's in our current.
Right
zone.
now, in our zone is 12.5%. But we had the analysis from RKG saying that in theory, from an affordable housing perspective, we could go up to 20% and still not be unduly burdening the developer. And so the thinking is that we would say, or we could say, that if a project applicant wanted to obtain, putting aside the mixed use retail, just focusing just on workforce housing. If the applicant wanted to obtain the approval to go forward with the additional half story, that the building would be a workforce housing building, meaning that that 7.5%, an additional 7.5% of units in the building above the 12.5% that are designated as affordable housing, the additional 7.5% would be workforce units, bringing it up to a total of 20% units that are not pure market units. We have the data from RKG that supports that as not being adverse to the project, particularly because we're adding square footage to the project. But it would be a way to be responsive, in my mind at least, to the many community residents who thought that we needed to support people who were in the workforce community and didn't necessarily be able to afford market rate housing in Needham. So this would be a way to tweak essentially to a table 2.b. You'd have to add some language, obviously, for defining workforce housing. And just to remind people, workforce housing is housing, kind of the middle market, as people often call it. Sorry?
110.
81 to 120.
I'm sorry?
It was 81 to 120.
80 to 120. 80% of AMI, average median income, up to 120%. And so that in terms of what that translates to, somewhere in my materials here, is, now these are Boston, Quincy, Cambridge numbers. They're not Needham numbers, so a little bit off. But say for a person, say 100% of median, on these are 2019 numbers, Boston, Cambridge. Two people, $90,000. If you had 6 people living in a household, at 100% median, it's $131,000 of income in the household. If you're talking about a single person, 120% is $99,600. 60% goes down to $49,800 for a single person. But it's a way to reach an additional community beyond those who, frankly, make too much money to be in affordable housing, but may desire to live in Needham. And in a way for us to have in the neighborhood program, something that is responsive to that. So it would be a tweak of allowing that additional half story to be available for a project that was adding 7.5% of units, additional units beyond the 12.5%. So a lot of information gone through at a high level, but that's the idea. So what do you know on the table?
I have that sounds interesting because we are trying to keep people that work here to be able to live here. We just had an article that we removed senior housing from it, like it's very specific. Would that be in conflict with, would it be inequitable to say this is for workforce and not for seniors or for people with disabilities, or are we?
I think it's an incentive, just like the mixed use. So it's not a mandate.
Oh, no,
It's not a
definitely
mandate.
not a
So
mandate.
No, but I'm
it
just
wouldn't
trying to
drive us out
figure
of
out.
compliance.
I'm not sure what you're referring to in terms of having dropped something from senior.
Housing
So,
authority.
The housing authority article, it was requested to remove any specifics for a specific group. So it was seniors, right?
Oh,
Right, age.
Right, well, even in the.
The state doesn't want
You can't age them.
Right, we could not include per se seniors under the MBTA.
Right, I'm just trying to figure out, I think it's a great idea, I'm trying to figure out why we had to remove it from one, and would this be?
I don't know, but that's federal
It
law.
looks like Katie has something to say.
Just a point of clarification, that workforce is a bit of a misnomer because it's really just what your income level is. And so
Sure.
seniors who fall between 81 and 120% of AMI could live in these units.
Oh, that's good.
So you don't actually have to be working.
Okay.
Kevin?
All right, the half story, right?
Mhm.
My understanding is that works for mixed use because the extra mechanicals for a first floor retail. One of those there. So what does a half floor get anyone if it's just gonna be residential?
Oh, additional units, gives you more housing capacity.
Okay,
It translates into additional housing capacity.
okay.
We've talked about all these things that need to be on the first floor, like potentially the plank room or the lobby.
Right,
or
okay,
whatever.
all right, so
it
no, it's
kinda-
not just the
It kind of gives
mechanicals.
you
that
that for free, right? And then you still
Yeah.
have the 4 stories for units.
Okay, all right.
If I just give an example of that, the property at 80, I think it's 80 Dedham Ave, across from the Unitarian Church, they have a half story on top, and they're like penthouse units that are set
Okay.
back a
That's
little,
separate.
so it's
Okay.
half a story.
Gotcha.
I don't think that the economic analysis is an issue though in this case, right? Since it's an incentive on top, it's
True.
not a requirement, so I don't know technically if that's a concern.
It may not be, but I
Right,
think
right.
Lee raised, I thought was a good point, because it will have to go before the executive office and.
Right, I think that the issue with the 12.5 is that that's a mandate,
Understood.
whereas this is an option, so. I
This
think-
is an
yeah.
incentive, right?
You're feeling more bullish.
Yeah, well, I just mean, I just don't think that's a concern, I don't think that's a concern, but.
The concern I have is that many people comment on what we're proposing, have a concern about height of buildings. And so that it would be perceived that we were saying you could have 3.5-story buildings in their base analysis by right, as long as you had this affordability. And in the neighborhood housing plan, you could have 4.5 stories by right, as long as you did this. And that might just be a negative that would make people be against the proposed zoning, that's all.
Well, I don't think this portion of the proposal changes the overall heights that are allowed by right.
But this
But
would be
4.5
an
is already
alternative
allowed,
to
right?
retail that we've already
Right.
put in.
It's only the neighborhood.
Oh,
It's
so
just
it
saying-
would
Not the
only
base
be in
plan.
the neighborhood plan.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah, only
okay,
in the neighborhood.
okay.
And it's also
Yeah.
saying that.
Oh,
you
and it's
can-
our
you can achieve this
alternative,
extra
so it
height.
would never be more than, oh, okay, I
Yeah, so
misunderstood.
you can achieve the extra height by either having
Which-
commercial
right.
or by including affordable housing.
I like it.
Emily, do you see any issues with this? Because it's a bonus?
So because it's a bonus, not so much, but question, I just want to confirm that I heard the last statement correctly, that it would be either a mixed use building with commercial and the units at the 1080, or it would be a multifamily with the 7.5% requirement for the affordability. Did I hear that correctly?
This is just for those buildings that achieve the extra, or that are looking for that extra.
Yeah.
But you're not
presented.
trying to make you're not mixing mixed use with the deeper affordability. Okay, that's what I wanted.
I don't think we're saying we're against that, but that gets a little crazy.
Can I try?
Well, from a feasibility point, that's what I was concerned about. So, yes. Yes, I think Lee, to your question, I think we can structure this as a bonus. And then, as I said before, you have the advantage that you're going to HLC before you go to town meeting. So you can check this with them, right? And make sure that, we structured this as a bonus, an incentive. We assume that this works. And, presumably they'll agree, because that idea of deeper affordability via incentive has been talked about before with them.
Michael, did you have
Yeah, I just
something?
want to make sure I'm saying this right. So, make sure I'm understanding this right. We're saying that you could build the 4 stories as of right, period. And with the 12.5%. And so as long as the 12.5% passes with EOHLC, we're fine. And then, because on top of that, we say, well, you can get an extra story if you do multi-use, or if you do, mixed use. Or, add
Workforce housing.
add this kind of intermediate affordability. Yeah, sorry. Okay.
Right, nice.
Thank you.
Yes.
Do you want to take a?
Yeah.
It might get a little complicated in terms of, because 7.5%, like if it's 14,
Well, we have a
We'll have
round,
to
there's a
figure,
round
we'll
out
have to figure
provision.
out the round up,
There is
round
a-
down thing, yeah. That
Okay,
could be a
so,
little complicated.
just to make sure that we have consensus, first of all, does anyone want to discuss a greater length? You look like you have something to say.
No, I have another issue to bring up.
Oh, all right.
When this issue is done, we'll move on to
So then,
another
do we
issue.
have consensus that we'd like to include this provision in our neighborhood housing plan? As just described and clarified by a motion? Sure, that would be lovely.
I move that we adopt Ron's suggestion, the Ron Root article,
Workforce housing.
the workforce housing as an incentive, as a bonus for, and correct me if I'm, for a half story, as a bonus,
In the neighborhood.
right, in
In the
the neighborhood plan, but it's above the 12.5% of affordability, creating up to a maximum of 7.5, is it?
Well, 20% total.
20% total.
Second.
All right. Any more
I think
discussion?
Question before you vote, is this for all sub-districts where there's a height change, or just the CSB sub-districts?
It's just the street.
No, well, we had talked about it in Garden Street as well.
Yeah, but, the chest,
There's
one-
3 areas that allow.
right,
the
3 of them.
That allow
Yeah.
now
Right.
extra.
And it's just it's
So
just
at Garden,
piggybacking
at Chestnut, and what's the third
Well,
one?
the two chestnuts.
There's two
Two
chestnuts,
chestnuts, right,
because
chestnuts,
there's east and
east and
west,
west.
because the heights are different.
Okay, okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
So all in favor
Oh,
of Natasha's,
re-second.
is there a second?
I
Yeah,
re-seconded, revised
re-second,
re-second.
okay. So all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Excellent.
Thanks.
Nice job. Okay, Lee.
Oh, so, I was contacted by, the folks that represent 100 West, who are looking at the draft zoning. And I don't know if you remember the last last home meeting, we discussed what the dimensional requirements would be for that particular district. And we set the front yard setback along Highland Avenue and along West Street at 10 feet, minimum with a maximum of 15. And we set the setback along the MBTA right of way at 20 feet, and they feel very comfortable with that, with those parameters. We did talk about how we're gonna treat the side yard setback, as you're going down Highland Avenue, because there's a residential zone line that bisects the property. And then the property continues, I think, for another 70 feet down the street. So we had set that standard, I think, at 20 or 30 feet off the residential zone line. And then said basically that the rest of the remainder 10 feet had to be landscaped. They've approached me because they've got some concerns about those parameters in terms of what their development profile looks like for that building. And they're I think they're gonna write basically a memo, basically articulating the change they'd like to see, but just so you're familiar with it, they're looking to have that setback set. Allow them to go all the way to the residential zone line, so there would be a zero zone line, I think, at that point. And then there's basically another 110 feet of frontage along Highland Avenue, which forms the residential zone, which they would use for ancillary, open space and ancillary facilities for whatever redevelopment they do on that site.
I don't understand that.
That's big.
What would they do?
They would use it, I think, probably, they would use it for open space, outdoor recreation, perhaps even a
Oh,
swimming pool.
this 30-foot setback.
No, basically, the remainder of the residential property is approximately 110 linear feet going down Highland
Oh,
Avenue.
that's presently zone residential,
Yes,
and it would stay zone residential.
it's, the overlay is sitting on top of a residential zone line at that point.
Okay, the overlay would sit on top of that little strip of residential that's on the I guess, south side.
So
Yeah.
I'd like to add something. So I wasn't able to be here at the last meeting, but I had talked to Lee about this because we had something come up with the Linden Chambers recently on the planning board about this, with the neighbors being concerned about having a single family house with a 4-story building adjacent to it. So we came to the conclusion, remember, Jean, about having that 10-foot buffer of landscape. And then I felt that, 30 feet, which is probably a little longer, that's just the size of this room, to be the buffer between a single family house and this larger unit, right? So I had recommended that based on the discussion that we had with the Needham Housing Authority about that, about the location of the building. So having a 0 lot line.
Well, it's not, I guess maybe I should have a map here so you could see it, although there's 2 maps. The residential zone line, basically, is not a property line,
Okay,
so it doesn't abut the residential house.
okay,
So essentially, there's a residential zone line, and then the lot continues, there's a layout for a street, which is about 40 feet wide, and then the lot continues another 70 feet before you hit the residential house.
okay.
So you have a distance of 110 feet
From the residential.
from the
house?
residential zone line to the house
Okay,
on the street. So that's
Okay.
really giving you about 110-foot buffer. The existing building.
Lee, I'm gonna give you this map so that maybe you can point on that map.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Where am I looking?
But L is.
Oh,
very
okay,
square,
fine, so,
bigger building.
here's the existing building, and here's the existing, basically probably residential zone line that's running here. And the current building is sited, the residential zone line follows the northerly sideline of this street currently. So that's basically where the residential zone line is, sits on the north side, I can't
So
remember the name.
that's not the property line, that's just the residential zone line.
That's the residential zone line. So this existing building is, I think it's 33 feet now off that residential zone line.
So they want to be able to bring it.
So they want to be able to bring that building down to this residential zone line, and then they have their lot basically, I think, it continues, it comes down here, and then it goes back, and then it comes back into an L shape here. And in that remainder area, they want to use that for amenities.
Okay.
And so what,
Somebody share the screen, whoever's doing the screen, can you share it, please? Because I can't see the map.
You're literally.
I'm imagining it.
this is why we need Alex. Yes. Yes.
Beautiful, thank
Sorry, Emily.
you. No worries.
So do people understand? So the residential zone line is basically running here.
So that's where the building would.
And they want to
Yeah,
bring the
the building
building
would
down
be.
to that point, and everything that kind of sits, their property, which extends more like an L shape like this, they would use, for these ancillary services, open space, landscaping, hardscape, perhaps a swimming pool.
And what's the setback of those ancillary?
That's the question.
Well, I'm just telling you conceptually.
I'm
what they're-
sorry, I
what
feel
they're
like I'm
asking for.
like, it's such
I-
a downer tonight.
So, I'm gonna ask them to put together something more formal in terms of what they're looking for. But I just want to put that out on the table that it's an issue, that we're gonna have to talk about at the next meeting, so it's not a surprise.
Let me just confirm though, the setbacks don't influence our compliance map.
No,
So these are changes that we can make without,
Uh,
right?
Yeah.
On that one?
No, I understand they have to be in the article, and sorry, Emily, I'm not minimizing the work that you would have to do on the fly, but I'm just saying, like, they're not gonna blow up our compliance model. Because all of
Yes.
our data modeling is based on the compliance model, we really don't wanna do anything at, you
No,
know.
that's what I'm trying to say.
It's gonna blow
is I think-
everything up.
I'm
So-
afraid that you might blow it up.
Why, how so?
Okay, so as I am understanding it, so right now, that residential line is not in either the zoning or the model. That's not a restriction, right? So if this is applied to one district, one parcel, that's one thing. But if you say that the underlying, if there are multiple parcels that are split lots, so you have a residential side and the other side, and you say that the residential lot area is not available for development for the buildings, but you've been modeling everything, which you have been, on the full parcel. I am worried that making that change is going to change the results of the model. Because AHLC is going to look at it and say, wait, let's say, just for the sake of an argument, you've got a split lot that's split in half. So one half is a residential district, and one half is one of the underlying districts that you've been talking about. Now you put an overlay on it that's been modeled on the whole parcel. You add a restriction that says, oh, but wait, you can't put any buildings on the residential side. You've now actually effectively reduced that parcel to half. And so your model's on the whole, you've reduced the parcel to half. I'm worried that that's going to be an issue.
But this is the only
This would be
parcel,
easier if I were here, I can draw it for you.
but this is the only parcel that we're talking about, right, Lee? I mean, we're not.
That's my question. Is this the only parcel that is a split lot?
No, there are, well, this is the only parcel we're talking about, but there are other split lots along Chestnut Street. There
But
are.
do we have to do it across the board? Can we just, this is the Avery Square.
Is the Carter's building the only property that's in the Avery Square business overlay?
Yes,
Yes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's only talking about this property.
so why couldn't we just focus on this property?
Yeah, then why can't we do an overlay that covers the residential area as well?
that's what
That's what the overlay is.
that's what the overlay looks like currently.
Oh, it does.
I'm sorry, can I understand, I don't understand, what's the difference between like the lot line and the residence line?
When they did their modeling, the state required that you couldn't follow, if you had to follow the lot lines.
Right,
And so in Needham, we have some lots which have two districts on them. So what that meant was if you had a district like this, which is the Avery Square overlay district, and the lot that was in the Avery Square district protruded into a residential zone, you were modeling that entire lot to come up with your density. That's how the state mandated that the models be done. And so in this case, what you have is you have the Avery Square district and you have it basically protruding into the residential zone.
Because effectively, the lot is split between two districts.
But
why
doesn't the
can't-
overlay solve that problem? Because
It-
the overlay will be over the whole thing.
The overlay is over the entire district, as currently written.
It's two towns, so if you have, let's
Oh,
say,
the town line.
Right, you have to- so you have two town lines going through your lot.
Yeah.
And so this is the residential town line, and this is the Avery Square.
Avery Square.
So imagine you have Newton and Needham
Yeah,
going through the middle of your parcel, but
Okay.
they require it to be at the property line, and
Yeah.
there's a setback.
okay.
But we have two conflicting pieces.
Alright.
So we're trying to make it all.
There are
Avery
other
Square.
lots that we have taken the entirety, we have zoned the entirety
Yeah.
of, even though they are currently in two different districts. Does that
So,
make
so my
sense?
question, yeah,
Yeah,
so
I
my
guess
question
that's
to you
why we
all,
can't fix it.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand in the other case, we'd have to actually like take land from another town, but if we're almost, I don't know.
You know,
why we
Lee,
can't
I
just
wonder, they have a lot of extra, I mean, they have all that land that is currently the driveway and the whatever, I mean, this doesn't seem like something, I mean, I have no idea how we as a group feel about this proposal, but it also doesn't feel like an insurmountable problem for the developer.
I'll let them make their own case.
Yeah.
Well, our rule basically said they had to be, 30 feet in from their residential zone line. And that the remainder of that land had to be landscaped, and they're saying that that's the problem.
Well, does this go before planning board? I mean, isn't this a planning board issue?
Well, no, this is
That's a
as
special, well, yeah.
Well, this is our zoning. I mean, you're writing the zoning, you are
Right.
establishing what the dimensional
Right.
requirements are for that district.
right.
And I'm hearing that there's an issue here. I just want you to be aware of that.
Yeah.
And I think the other issue I was hearing was that the height that we established, I think, for the district, which is 44 feet, they would like to see it increased to 49.
So I can see that Katie has something to say. I'm also wondering if, because of that height is achieved only through special permit, I mean, aren't we not,
Our special permit height is 44 feet. They want it to be 49.
no, I understand that, but to get their fourth floor,
Right.
however many feet that is,
Right.
that's a special permit condition, which takes us out of the MBTA communities
Right. So you
by
can-
right system. So are we even subject to these requirements for setbacks and lot lines and
That was gonna be my comment, which is
the PC parcels?
Well, I
under
think
the
that
base
we-
and the neighborhood housing plan, you have an as of right scenario for the site and a special permit site. So if you're open to the conceptual proposal, that
So
the
that's something
developer
that we
saying you
could do
could
without
put it in
blowing
the
up
special
that.
permit component only, and it wouldn't impact compliance.
Yeah, I think that's
Oh, you mean keep the same rules that we have for the 3 stories?
And
And if they
as
want
a
the
variance.
4th story, then they're gonna have to get a special permit anyway, and that takes
Right.
us out of the compliance map, and so we can do, I mean, the planning board could.
Right.
So we'd have 2
Give us a
different
special
dimensional
permit.
standards, actually. We'd have one in the, I guess in the base, which would be the 3 stories, and we would do it the same way. Well, it's off the residential zone line too, so Emily, I think you probably have a problem there.
Yes, so on the height first, if I could just jump in, yes, we set it at 44 feet because that was consistent with your existing zoning. But I notice, and I meant to ask you about this, Lee, in the dimensional standards in the neighborhood plan, 4 stories is 50 feet. So you may want to make that consistent with the others. So if you look at Article 2, on page 13, you'll see in the CSB W, we have 4 stories at 50 feet. And in A1 and B, we have 4 stories at 50 feet. So if you're going to do a special permit for 4 stories in ASB under the base plan, do you also want
Yeah.
that to be 50 feet?
Right, and that's not an issue.
Yeah, that's not.
Change that to 50.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then with
That's
the-
not an issue.
And they were asking for 49.
Jean, you have a
Well,
question?
well, on the height though, right? Do we just want to go to 50 or do we want to say 50 with a setback? Or provided they've got a setback on the top floor? Or we leave that to the site, to the special permit, what we got, because, I mean, that's, just want to put that out there, that's a very, a site that draws a lot of focus. And when we did the 4th floor before on that, by town meeting action, we did it
It's step back.
with a step back.
It's still three stories.
No, it's a special permit provision that she has in there,
Right,
which
Page
is,
5.
on page 5, yeah.
Well, I'm looking at page 13 for the neighborhood housing, which has
Right.
increased height.
She's talking about changing that 40 to a 50.
Yes, but in the same table, it says maximum building height 3. I'm looking at page 13.
yeah, that's the amendment to the table, and that's really for the base, that's the base number, Jean. I think the number you want to look at is what On's talking about, where she talks about on page 5 of the first article,
That's
where,
going back to page 5, that's the base.
right, and it enables a special permit up to 4 stories and 44 feet.
Wait, where is that? Because I'm seeing 3, I'm on page 5.
On the ASB, the
I'm going to share my
applicant-
screen so you can all see it. Hang on.
See, it's a special permit.
Okay,
4 stories and 44 feet.
Yep.
So if that goes to 50 feet, the question again is how far is it from that single family house in that single family district?
Right.
Well,
Right.
and also on
And the
the
setback.
street, yeah. Not a setback, but the setback
The
of the
setback
4th
on the
floor.
4th floor,
The
yes,
step back.
yes.
But we know that they're gonna want that special.
but in,
Yeah.
So all of the special conditions can be dealt with by the planning board, because if they're going for a special permit, they don't get any of this
They
by
just
right.
go planning board, it's still. Deal with
Yes,
this
but
planning.
you're starting the negotiation with already having one strike that you already have. If the planning board's starting with the setback on the 4th floor, then you're not going back and forth about that.
Oh, no, yeah, yes.
And that was something that was, the last 2 proposals that we saw had the setback, because that was requested
Right, that's all I'm trying to do.
for
is
this
take
particular
this-
site.
Yeah,
Yeah, it allows us to have leverage on other things that are unforeseen versus something that you know that the town has already requested. Does that make sense? Chris, look like you're nervous. Am I wrong? Okay.
No, but I agree with the premise that if you know you want a setback on the top floor, you should
I
bake
think,
that into
I
the
think that's
zoning.
what town meeting had requested.
Yeah,
That was in the base zoning. I mean, that's in the zoning for the overlay right now. I
right,
mean, when we allowed the 4th story,
Right.
right, there was a
Right.
setback off that
Right.
building.
So then I think it should be
I'm just
added.
saying, I don't want to step back from the step back. You know, you know. I mean,
okay, so where do we just land? We don't need to worry about the four-story lot line issue, because that'll be done under special permit.
I think you have to still worry about that, Emily, because in the base zoning,
We're asking.
it's
for
3 stories and the setback is measured off of the residential zone line for the building. So the building is not being allowed to protrude into the residential zone, although the density that we came up with for that site is the same density that the building currently accommodates. So, I mean, it's certainly possible to get it totally accommodated on the non-residential side of that lot.
So the overlay zoning does not have that, we specifically do not require the setback. I have a couple of questions on setbacks, but let's deal with this one first. We specifically don't require the setback from the residential district, right? We call that out. We call that out as this is not included. So I think what we need to do is this particular split parcel an isolated incident, and it's a one parcel zone that we can create a special rule for this one parcel zone. I would prefer to do that rather than set, and totally open to your ideas, but my preference is to do that rather than set up a precedent for a residential lot line that's splitting multiple zones across multiple sub-districts. I think that's going to be a major headache. I think HLC.
That makes sense to me as well, right?
So I think then what we're looking at then is, I think the rear setback of 20 feet along the MBTA right of way. And then,
30 feet from the lot line.
And for this one, I thought, and why would we do 30 feet? Why wouldn't we just go to the residential zone line?
And go to the residential zone line.
Go to the residential zone line for the base and allow them to utilize that for ancillary.
However, we should still have a 10-foot buffer because that was the big discussion between the
A 10-foot,
community.
well,
At the lot line,
you'll have more than a buffer than
but a planting buffer.
a planting buffer from their more active uses at the residential zone line.
No,
So
at
then
No,
I-
actually, at the lot line,
at the lot line.
at the lot line, right, okay.
But then I would memorialize that as a distance from rather than referring to the residential lot line, I would memorialize it as this distance from the lot line allows these uses, this distance from the lot line allows those uses. And Lee, you and I can work out the exact dimensions for that.
Okay.
I mean, it's not a hearing.
You good?
Yeah, I'm good. I think we can do that. Okay, I just wanted to bring that up, get it resolved tonight in some form.
And okay with the roof, with the 4 visible setback on height?
I'm okay with that.
No,
I think we should,
I don't know, yeah,
Jean, I mean, I think we should keep that setback at the 4th floor because that's what the town meeting had approved.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to say that I note that there is a hand raised, but this is not a public hearing. And so we are not taking public comment at this time. So I'm just acknowledging so that you don't wait around to be called on. My apologies.
But is that Emily's hand?
My
Oh,
hand.
well, Emily's hand, but,
It's Emily's hand.
oh, it's Emily's hand. There was another one
I think
before.
it's down.
There was another one.
I think they took
Yeah,
it down,
okay.
yeah.
Right.
okay, well, I will work with Emily and I will reach out to the property owners of 100 West to see if we can come up with a solution.
Yes, lady.
Can I, unrelated, go back to the, Ron's proposal on the workforce housing? I just want to note for the record that there's 4 districts where we add a half story. So Chestnut West, Chestnut East, Chestnut Garden, and the business district, which is Highland between May and Rosemary. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows that we would
That
apply it
doesn't
to
trouble me,
on that.
but
Okay,
speak only for myself.
great, thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask about, building setback. So I hear you using the term setback in two different ways, and I want to make sure I clarify my understanding. There's a setback from the property line, but you've been talking about an upper floor setback, which I would normally refer to as step back, that you're stepping the building back from the facade. Am I
Correct.
hearing correctly? That is what you want? Because that's not currently in the zoning, so I need to make sure it's there.
Yes.
Yes.
And do we have a step back number that we approved?
There's a step back in the overlay.
There was one for the,
So it's with the whatever it is in the overlay would be the same step
so
back.
that was based on the
Just wanna make
existing
sure.
building as opposed to a new building.
I'm sorry, just to wordsmith, the difference again is step back versus setback.
Step back is the fourth floor recess.
On the
I
fourth
understand,
floor, so that it's not at the level of the front of the building.
Right.
Gotcha.
Okay, so Lee, I just need to confirm with you which ones that step back refers
That's
to.
based on the existing building.
Right, so maybe you go to 50 Dedham. Because 50 Dedham was,
50 Dedham, that was just how the roof was done, where the top floor had to be set back.
oh, that wasn't dictated.
It was
I
dictated
thought
under
that was
zoning.
in- Yeah, I thought it was
It was-
dictated under the downtown overlay.
It was, so that's different than what was done in Avery Square. That was basically that you had to be under a slope roof. That was the rule. That was the height rule in the.
No, not, that's the one across the street from the mobile station on Great Plain. I was thinking 50 Dedham across from the.
Right, and that was basically the rule. There was a rule that if you had the building had to either be under a slope roof or the 4-story had to be set in.
Right.
Right,
That's all I'm saying. That's a model for a setting on a new building, so we're not,
okay.
I was just FYI.
Okay, fine. I thought you were saying something different. So this is different than Natasha, than what we did in the overlay. In the overlay, we set, in the Avery Square overlay, we set setbacks in from that existing building and said that only 25% of that 4-story could be utilized for ancillaries, for basically for living space. And I think what Ron's talking about, I just want to get the language of it so we're all clear on what we're doing.
I think there has to be a dimensional piece there, or they're gonna give a 2 foot.
No, exactly.
So. Okay, so I guess it goes back to the design guidelines. It just said that the 4-story needed to either be located under a pitched roof or recessed from the face of the building as shown on the design guidelines. And I think there was a standard in those design guidelines.
So we have to take that up.
Okay.
So I have a question that's related to this. There's a multifamily on page 3, the multifamily overlay district contains the following sub-districts, which are shown. So there's a sub-district that has zoning already, but then there's the underlying zoning. So if you have the multifamily overlay, the sub-district, and the underlying zoning, which one is the one that dominates or whatever? Which one is the one that you have to abide by?
So the sub-district is a component to the multifamily overlay. It's not a separate thing. So you have a multifamily overlay that has multiple sub-districts within it. And then you've got the base zoning. So if you're the property owner, you can choose to do the base zoning or you can choose to do the overlay. And the rules of the overlay depend on which sub-district you're in.
So the sub-district is the location, not a zoning.
But I
Right.
thought that the sub-districts have zoning requirements in the.
The sub-district, she's creating sub-districts under the multifamily zoning that she's
Right.
creating.
Okay,
And in each of those sub-districts have different sets of rules. They have different heights, different FARs.
okay. I just
different-
want to make sure that we understand, because there's these sub-districts and then this over, so I just wanted to
So
make
the,
sure.
so the multiple family overlay is sitting across all these districts, but then each of these areas of town, Chestnut Street East, Chestnut Street West, which are all in the multifamily overlay district, have different sets of rules that apply to them, and those are the sub-district rules.
And they have these acronyms, which are the same as the acronym for the underlying zoning, but that's just to be able to identify it on a map.
Yes.
That doesn't change, that doesn't mean anything about applying the rules of the underlying zoning.
Right.
I trust that, I'm just saying that the sub-district to the sub-district to the sub-district, what's the rule? So we'll figure it out, but as long as Emily feels comfortable that she's got it, I'm okay.
We could have called them sub-district A, sub-district B, sub-district C, but we had spent so much time, you as a committee, but during this process, talking about the underlying zoning, it made sense just to use the same abbreviation, just so we could trace what was what, and
Yeah,
why we
I
were
think
making these
so.
changes.
Jeannie gets it, so we're fine.
We're fine.
Former planning board.
Seriously, Jeannie will explain it to me later. She knows every sub-district.
But I think
No, I understand. It's like I just wanted to make sure that.
All right, so we've gone through both articles. I understand that there are actually 4 articles, but we don't have the detail on the 3rd and 4th, is that
Just
correct?
the maps.
Just the maps, okay,
It's the maps and the meets and bounds restrictions. You'll have those complete articles next week.
okay. So does anyone else have any other business right now?
I only have just, so these are such nits, they have to do with the footnotes and having the connecting A, B, and C to the correct footnote, even going beyond what I already gave you. It's not worth discussing, it's just for clarity. So I'll
Share it with me.
just communicate further with Lee on that.
and I have a couple of nitpicks I'll share with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Delighted to avoid all the nitpicks.
I do have a quick question. Well, Emily, will you be reviewing the development standards of 317.7 regarding the things that we're changing to stormwater and things? I know you went through it already, but I'm concerned that, we have separate things here that are different than what's in the regular zoning. Okay. That's one question, and then one question for Christie. There's submission requirements. Again, we're very limited to what we can review, so accessory buildings and ADUs or anything like that, would we be able to look at the accessory buildings and comment on that? And could you do an ADU on a I don't know, I mean, I'm just trying to think of accessory buildings that, we have an ADU bylaw now, so I don't know if that's in conflict with some of this.
I think it's specific to single family.
I think that
SRA.
that use, the accessory dwelling unit use, sort of supposes that you've got one principal residential use on the property and
Yeah,
a separate, although sometimes attached, accessory use, residential use on the same property. So here where you've got, any number of dwelling units all either within the same building or a set of buildings, none of them should qualify, I wouldn't think, as an accessory dwelling unit. They should all be their own independent,
So the
freestanding.
So the ADU is separate, but the accessory, because they're talking about accessory buildings. for-
Accessory use is customary
Accessory, oh, okay.
to a multiple family dwelling.
So accessory use is not accessory buildings.
But you could have more than one building on a lot, so you could put up.
For example, right, you could have, like the bungalow court on West Street has a line of detached garages in that property, so that would be an accessory.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, there's no submission requirements. It doesn't say accessory buildings. And so I just want to make sure that unless it's phrased differently, and I'm not seeing it here. Because I think that we would want to see what those accessory pieces are on a lot for site plan review.
I think you would certainly want to see all structures that are going to be constructed on the lot shown on the site plan. And I think that if that's not included, and it looks like it's not, we can
So
revise.
we can add that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but
I think C might be
But can we
revised.
limit the number of accessory units that we see on the property?
Well, accessory I heard Natasha say accessory buildings or structures.
Structures,
Right, so
right.
those can certainly be shown on the plan.
So if you have sheds, garages, whatever it
So they
is,
would be subject to regular.
but it doesn't
setbacks, right?
say, but it doesn't say here that we have any, under the.
Yeah,
subdivision.
so I'm seconding your suggestion on that.
So maybe under subsection C, we would say, instead of existing and proposed building, all existing and proposed buildings showing setbacks from the property lines. So anything they want to construct on the property should be shown on the site plan.
Right, it's just a matter of if we don't have it here, then they will say that we don't have purview over it. And then my last one here is projected traffic volumes in relation to existing and reasonably anticipated conditions. Is that a traffic study? Because if you're doing projected traffic volumes, it means that Ron and I could just sit there and count cars one by one.
What page are we on here? Ron?
Sorry,
Nine.
page 9.
Thank you.
I think that projected traffic volumes is probably going to be that we are having this much units or commercial square footage, and these are the uses, and these are the ITE traffic volumes associated with those, and here's our total. I don't think it's necessarily a full traffic study.
I would completely agree with you, but we've had people that have one person standing on a Sunday counting cars. I'm not kidding.
Prepared by.
Okay, so maybe be
We
a
did-
little bit more specific, yeah.
Prepared by traffic engineer.
Prepared by a traffic engineer or someone who,
So, you know,
it just,
or in compliance.
doesn't have
with
to
the
be-
ASTM
yeah,
standards.
just
Yeah.
professional.
So
But it's a lot
one
of
question on that, can I just, I just want to just remind you that all that this is applying to all multifamily development. So that would include not just the big developments that you of course have already seen, but it would include a 3-family or 2 duplexes on a site. So just think about that in terms of site plan approval. You can waive the requirements of section 5.13 parking plan and design requirements and some of the dimensional standards for a historic building. Consider whether or not you want to be able to waive some of the requirements of site plan review for a smaller project. You need a traffic study.
That's
for a
reasonable.
big-
But if we don't have it there, then in the community sometimes, depending upon, the project.
The only difficulty with the waiver of an application requirement is that they don't know what they need to submit until they get in front of the planning board. So maybe we want to think about assigning the ability to provide that waiver to either the planning director or the building commissioner or somebody who the applicant can interact with during daytime hours without having to get an application filed and then wait
And then find out
for a hearing to
later.
get noticed and then hear that their application is effectively incomplete.
Okay.
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
That was it. Thank you. What else?
I have a really basic question. This probably just goes without saying, but I know that if there's going to be a commercial, if it's going to be a mixed use in some of the zones, you can go up a half a story. Now, I'm assuming with regard to the commercial use, our current requirements for some uses requiring a special permit, some uses, if they have a certain amount of parking requirement, but they're not going to have that much, they need a waiver, that's a special permit. Those would still apply to those situations, wouldn't they?
Yes.
Yeah, we just, I mean, I assumed that, but I just wanted to throw it out on the table. Everybody understands, yeah.
As long as it doesn't affect the as of right of the multifamily. So if you have a use on the commercial floor that requires a special permit and you are denying that special permit, and in so denying, you are somehow also denying the as of right multifamily, you would be in trouble.
But as long as we allow standalone multifamily, which we do in every one of these cases, the owner could simply do standalone multifamily instead. So what,
Right, this is just the bonus,
yeah, it's just
And
for
the
bonus.
is bonus.
I look at it as multiple overlays. I mean, right? I
On
mean, you
that
can still
note-
do whatever you agree.
So,
That's how I think of it.
if there's no more discussion on this point, I'm gonna just review our next steps.
Right?
Aaron is ready to bust out of here. So just a reminder that at our next meeting, we'll be joined by Gary Agenian and maybe his some cohort. So we'll be prepared to discuss not only the plan, but also all of the capital analysis that Katie has laid out with all the changes that we have requested or additions that we have requested. And then additionally, I presume that Emily will have some of the changes made that we've talked about this evening. And then remember, please, that we're having the joint meeting on the 30th. That's with the Finance Committee, the Planning Board, Select Board, and this committee to present the whole enchilada to the group, and then including the final report from Eric and Emily. And then we will, the next day, turn this thing over to the state, and that will be essentially our last meeting. So
The April 30th.
the April
April
30th.
I was gonna see you on the
But we
20th,
have a meeting next Thursday,
the 25th.
25th,
Right,
to finalize.
To
all of this.
finalize.
and vote to send it to the select board. Planning board, vote to send your
Or-
recommendation.
Yeah, this is our recommendations, right? Because we've already approved the plans, so this is so anything before we hear Kevin's motion to adjourn?
Are we in a rush? Sure, I make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, thank you.
Want me to send you a,
Not yet.
No, it's interesting.
It's not my. Yeah, something that I could.
I can send you